All right, welcome to Violating Entertainment Network. My name is David, and I am your host. This is a new segment called Calling Out YouTubers. Now, I'm not really locked into this name. It does sound a little, kind of not attention grabby. I might change it later, and I might go by some suggestions. But basically, it is what it says it is: calling out YouTubers, and this is not calling out on YouTubers for like a collective YouTuber action. This is actually um, basically calling out on the fallacies, the bad arguments that YouTubers have. Okay, I was stupid to start this before really actually getting something to drink. Now, this is actually more of a podcast format. I try to say that more like a kind of like a radio show type deal. I'm not going to do a whole lot of editing. I'm going to try to talk as consistently as possible. There might be a bunch of uhs. There might not. Sometimes I can be good at this. Sometimes I'm not. I'm still quite new at this, and I only have a certain schedule to keep that I don't really have the capability of being able to do this consistently all the time. Sometimes I try to go ahead and try it, and a lot of the times it's not even just about time. It's sometimes about like there's really just not a whole lot of things I really want to talk about or I'm interested in talking about. I mean, news is fine, but it gets kind of monotonous to talk about news all the time because a lot of the time it's the same damn thing. And excuse the language, I might have some language during this, so be aware. But anyway, as you can see on my screen here, this is Temple, and so this first segment that we're starting out here is going to be debuted on Temple, and this particular one is, you can see, published May 1st, 2019. So it was about a week ago at the point of my recording here. And as you can see here, this is basically saying leftist activists force MasterCard to vote on banning the far right. Now, I will explain the fallacies in this particular portion momentarily here, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit more about what the point of this show is going to be. I mean, obviously, like I said, the basics here, but I want to get into more like talking about this is going to be based on actually calling out independent content creators. Now, largely because I'm currently having a lot of fun calling out independent content creators that are actually calling out like media, like Tim Pool, he's calling out a lot of media and social media and stuff like that. And I find it fun to call out people who are kind of hypocrites. I would say it's a little bit boring when there's people who have opinions and they don't go ahead and call out other people for their opinions and their wrong think, quote unquote. But I might do that. I mean, a lot of people do that. A lot of popular YouTubers call out other YouTubers and content creators and media as well. And I just think I find it actually fun to do this kind of portion. So anyway, I already went ahead and told you about the title. I will go ahead and kind of talk about why this title is wrong here. First of all, leftist activists. I mean, you might see in the article, this is a subjective term. It may be leftist activists. My belief of the political spectrum is not a right-left in the sense of like, well, there's communists, full communists, or anarcho-communists on the left, and then full totalitarian white supremacist Nazis on the right. That's not the type of political spectrum I believe in. I believe in the political spectrum that makes a little bit more sense for at least for left and right. Now I don't know if I necessarily would really want to put myself on this spectrum, but I do for the sake of trying to get people to understand where I'm at. So basically the way I see it is on the furthest left possible, you have 100% totalitarian government. It doesn't matter if it's communist. It doesn't matter if it's fascism. It doesn't matter if it's just one person who's running everything, as long as it's 100% government control. To the furthest left, that is what that is. To the furthest right, you have 0% government control. And now, this might sound kind of scary, right? To believe that there would be zero government and just to think about it. But the reality is that most of us kind of operate without government most of the time anyway. So it's not quite as scary as one might think. It's just kind of scary to believe that you don't actually have a big mommy and daddy looking after you because you're such a little childish cunt. Excuse my language. And excuse my... I might actually have to go ahead and stop this to go get some to take care of my dry throat here. But anyway, so that's where we start out here is that leftist activists, I mean, that's pretty subjective. I mean, if you're to go with the left-right paradigm of U.S. American politics, okay. But if we were to go with overall left versus right in the actual political paradigm, the way I see it, if you want a certain level of government, that's where you put yourself on the spectrum. So, on the left you have the most, on the right you have zero. Hopefully even negative, if that's possible. So, that's the way that I see it. It kind of gets that way in the U.S. American politics where you tend to have the people on the right want less government, but they don't want zero government. So it's not really included. And so then they go ahead and put like anarcho-communists on the leftist portion when anarcho-communists probably go on the anarcho portion, which is on the right. Because, okay, so here's the way that I see things. I don't want to tell people how to live their lives. I don't want other people to tell other people how to live their lives, with the exception of adolescents. I think that there's a big role for parents to play in guiding children, and so that they do kind of need to guide them by telling their children what to do or what not to do. As would in the sense of a mentor versus a student, right? Or teacher versus student. Of course, those are more voluntary. Parental versus child of a parent is not quite so voluntary. I mean, in some cases it can be. If you've like adopted a child, that might be more voluntary. But it's not quite so voluntary. I believe in voluntarism. So in the fact of something like anarcho-communism, that's a portion of, if you were to just take away the government portion of communism and just have a voluntaristic society where everybody in that particular society agrees to these subsets of rules under the anarcho-communism, whether it be the mainstream decision of anarcho-communism, how they want the rules to be set up, or whether it be a subset of it. Or just anything that just does not involve violent force without the full consent of the people within that society. So like with America, people do have consent, or they did have consent when the Constitution was first made. But it wasn't everybody that had consent. In fact, it was like 1% of the population or less. I mean, in some cases you can say like, for certain aspects it was more like 5 to 20%. But that's still not even a majority. So the rules that we're operating on now are not actually by 100% consent, or even 51% consent of the populace. This was just like 51% or more of the populace that was allowed to make the rules, because they had the guns and the force to be able to do so. And so I think that that's kind of wrong. It's not just kind of wrong, it is wrong. But I digress. My point is that I want voluntary societies. I want there to be where people, like within a point of consent, you should have the right to remove consent. Like, for instance, in the case of a job, or in the case of sex, right? A sexual act. If the person is pursuing a sexual act upon you, and then you decide you no longer want it, then you should ideally go ahead and be able to remove that consent, right? You can consent initially, but then say, well, I no longer consent during. I'm not so sure I would be able to go with the belief of going for after. I suppose if you're under some influence of something, there might be an argument for that, and that would be debated as to how to deal with that in the particular society that you're in. But again, the way that I see it, you have a voluntaristic society where 100% of the people in that society, whether they are there at the beginning or people join afterwards, that they 100% consent to being there and consent to the rules. They might not 100% consent to the rules, but by being there and choosing to be there, you do 100% consent to the rules, at least in the standards of even our particular society today. Like, for instance, when you go and work for some employer, even if you don't agree with the rules, you agree to follow the rules. And, and just like in a government-run country as well, is that if you go to another country, you agree to follow their rules, even if you don't agree with their rules. And so it's still a voluntaristic thing because you volunteer to live there. Now, if you're born in a country where, like if you're born to the United States, that's not voluntaristic to be born within that society and then saying, well, you agreed to these rules by being here by default. I would believe that if you choose to no longer be a part of that society and you have property or you have the ability to go to a different society or different property that is separate from those rules, and it's not just so. I mean, I don't want to get too far into this, but basically the way that I see it is that there's a market of ideas as well. So that I believe that there can be a market of societies where people who want to live the way that they want to live should be able to live instead of living to a centralized ideal, and that it's forced by violence, and then just the way that this violence really is just horrible violence. I mean, I'll get into it at a different point if I need to, because this is going to be about Tim Pool, but this is the debut episode, so I kind of want to get into a little background of my particular beliefs. Excuse me. Like I said, I have a dry mouth. So with my for my personal voluntaristic society, it's different from what I can see of somebody else. I mean, it might be that my voluntaristic society is just what I claim as my property. That could be my body. And what I live on. Now, I suppose I could rent it, and that would be somebody else's property, but I would have to agree to their rules. So it's not really quite living in my own society. I'm actually talking about making a claim to property that nobody else really actually has a rightful claim to. And that could mean like, well, the person who may have had the claim to the property before just didn't work on that property for a particular period of time. So by not working on it for a particular period of time, by default, they lose the right to that property. And I know it can be a kind of complex thing if you think about it at first, but if you go more into the context of how this can possibly be dealt with, even in the essence of if you've got multiple people making claims to that property. I mean, the way that it works right now is you've got a government who essentially holds records, right? And because they're the ones who control who owns what. You gotta when you buy property, you gotta get it approved through the state, essentially. And the state meaning the government, not necessarily like, Arizona or Texas type of deal. Generally, you file it through county. But when I say state, I'm talking about the general government. And so, anyway, the way that particular works is that you have a record keeping place that can actually be biased towards you as well. So I think it would be better to be able to have a private way of keeping records, and then you can have an actual way of arbitration. Where currently, right now, in a particular place like even Europe or any place where there's government, arbitration is absolutely horrible for the common person. It's great for the person who has money. Well, kind of great. It's not great if they lose. But it works well for the people who have money and who win in their cases, even if they don't have money. But it doesn't do justice for the common person, whether it's through criminality or civil. It really screws the common person already. I mean, most of the time, cases are settled outside of court. Even in criminal cases, they're kind of settled outside of court. There's a settlement. There's a settlement where you don't take it to trial. It's basically called like a plea agreement, right? And so basically, like, what is it? Something like, what, 92% of cases? Maybe larger than that. I don't really remember the number. I did some criminal justice studying in college. I think it was like either somewhere between 92 and 95% of criminal cases don't go to trial. They end in a plea agreement because even the government knows that it's not sustainable to have every single person go to trial. So it already is a flawed system because it's too expensive to actually have to put every single person in trial. I mean, you have the right to, like for a traffic violation or a minor violation that you don't get kidnapped and locked away. You have the right to represent yourself in a trial to prove that you didn't do any wrong. But for a $120 or $200 ticket, is it really worth to go through all that effort? I mean, for some people it might, but for the common person it's not, especially the poor person. It's just cheaper to pay it off because you actually, by fighting it in court, you lose money having to fight it in court because that's time you could have spent earning money at a job. So it really screws the little person. It might be great for the middle class because they're fine. They don't have much worry about it. They already are relatively set. I mean, even if they lose a day or two at work, that's fine. You know, and maybe they'll fight it. Most of the time they don't. They just pay it off. It's a racket. They make money from it. I think everybody knows this. I mean, and then there's other ways of them making money too. And it's a way of making money and taking property from you without you really wanting that property taken from you. I mean, when you do a wrongful U-turn because some politician decides that you shouldn't make that U-turn, and a cop finds you making an illegal U-turn, and you get fined $200 for it, you think this is bullshit. Even if you are a rich person. You think it's bullshit you have to pay $200 when you probably made a safe U-turn. Hopefully you did. I mean, they just arbitrarily decide where they want to put U-turns. And they well, not just U-turns, but any kind of traffic rule that they have. It's kind of an arbitrary thing. Yeah, there maybe with the fact of like going slower speeds in a residential area, that might have some value to it. But at the same time, as I've seen, and even in my own personal use of that, I don't really actually follow those laws. Nobody really does. And thank God, most of the time, people don't really get hurt. Sometimes they do. Most of the time, they don't. At least as far as I'm aware. It does, having the speed limit doesn't really actually stop people from speeding. It just stops them from speeding when there's a law enforcement person around. Or, whatever, breaking any law. I mean, even my own mother, who liked to follow the laws, generally speaking, that, she didn't try to speed so much. Especially because she grew up on her own father. Excuse me. Her own father taught her that basically speeding doesn't get you there faster, generally. I mean, maybe it can get you there, like, a couple of minutes faster, but is it really worth it to really get to speed? For me, it's worth it, not because I want to get there faster. I just like to go fast. That's just me. I don't really actually want to hurt people, and I try to be more aware when I'm actually going faster than I probably should be. I think there should be recommendations for speeds. Say you should go this speed. I think generally people, for the most part, go the speed that they feel comfortable. The people who are gonna go really super fast, well, they're gonna do it anyway. You know, no speed limit is gonna stop that. There might be a law enforcement officer who, if they can get those people to actually pull over to start with, yeah, they might be able to potentially stop it. But they'll only stop it for that one time. More than likely, the person will just go back to speeding again. I mean, even for my dad, who likes to speed as well, and I don't think it's because he wants to get there faster. I mean, there might be some play into that, but largely it's just kind of like, at least for me and my dad, it's kind of like, oh, we just got to get there first. Even if we're not there first, we're going to get there with the belief that we're first, type of deal. I mean, I like to have that idea even as walking on my legs. I like to be places first. Just as a nice accomplishment. It's a feeling of accomplishment. Even if I don't end up being there first, I feel like if I made the effort to do it, I feel accomplished. Anyway, with that being said, the whole point is that laws are arbitrary. They're opinions. They're not really based on moralities most of the time. They're based on controlling people and trying to control their minds. It doesn't really work because the people who won't follow those rules are just not going to follow those rules. It doesn't matter if you are a bad person or a good person. You're not going to follow rules that you don't really agree to. Or you might even agree to the rules and you still might not follow them. But at least you might be more willing to accept the consequences when you don't follow them. So, anyway, with that being said, I just want to digress and say that this is that whole portion about, I believe that people should be able to have the right to be able to consent 100% of people in a particular society. I don't think there needs to be some sort of nation state of 300 million or a billion people type deal, because that's too many people that have too many conflicting ideas of how their lives should be run. It just is inefficient, and it causes the majority of the people to be screwed. We've seen this time and time again. We should have societies where people who believe the way that they should live their lives is chosen by those who exist in those societies. At least chosen by those who actually believe the way they live their lives should go. Not by what other people think. It should be by what you think. I mean, when you have your own home and stuff like that, you make your own rules when you live with other people if you're the person who is the head of the household. Or maybe you'll have a co-op with being head of household, and you'll make rules together. It's like if it's a household with parents and some kids. As you know, I mean, there might be an actual person who is the more aggressor of the two on the kids potentially. In the sense of making rules for the kids, because and it's always funny too, right? Because in a family household, right, the parents will make the rules, and then when the kids see that, well, the parents are breaking the rules, they'll be like, well, you just broke your own rules, and the parents will always be like, my house, my rules, I get to break my rules. That's essentially how government works, right? Is that, I mean, yeah, okay, you can say, well, government is made of people. Not really. Government is not made of the people who are in government are people. But the idea of when you say that government is people, you're saying that government is made of people like you and me. Not really. These people, they generally make a huge amount of money, more than a lot of us. They have different ideas. They want to tell us how to live our lives, so that's a little bit different. I don't want to tell my neighbor how to live. I don't want my neighbor murdering me, but if my neighbor decides to murder me, I want to be prepared for that. No cop is going to be able to come to my aid at the point that my neighbor wants to murder me. Only I can come to my aid for that. I mean, I can hope that maybe a cop might be around, but that's not gonna happen for 300 million people or 350 million people or a billion people. That would never happen because you need at least one law enforcement officer per person on a 24-hour a day basis to protect those people fully. That just wouldn't happen. Now, ideally, you could create a society where you can have a better security system where, because obviously you don't necessarily need like one per family or per person type of deal. I mean, it would be good when you're out there individually out there running around getting stuff done. That might be ideal, but you really just need a security force that actually is more interested in the actual security as opposed to the police who are really just interested in making money. That's generally how that works. They're not so much interested, and this is why you see a lot of abuse in police, is because they're just interested in making money. And that could be all just keeping their job. Because being a police officer, you make a hell of a lot more money than you would as being a private security person, generally speaking. Because generally speaking, private police, they make what, probably starting about $15 an hour, depending upon where you're at. Maybe even less than that. I mean, I think armed, you might start at 15 for sure. Uh, and that maybe if you got experience, you can make like over $20 an hour. And in many cases, as a police officer, you're making like $30 an hour. And with more tenure and experience, you can be making $40 and $50 an hour. And so that's just not really fair to especially private security. It's the law enforcement is competing unfairly with private security and really causing, well, it's not a big issue that is really at the forefront of people's care, but law enforcement competes just like like for instance, if you were to have a private school, or just if you were as a person on YouTube wanted to be teaching people, you compete with the government workers, and they get to have force on their side. So, like for instance, if I wanted to have an entire school on YouTube, and it took away millions of students from the teachers who had used teachers unions. It took away kids from them. The kids would be able to maybe learn more from me. I'm not saying that they can. I'm just saying that this is a scenario here, that they would be able to learn more from me than from them. And so all of a sudden there's millions of them coming to me. They could use the power of the state to shut me down because I'm causing too much problems and taking away their money and stuff like that. We can see that with these, these contract issues that occurred in my current state. And when I refer to state, I'm actually talking about like a state of the United States. So in this case, Colorado. There were some issues in the Denver schools, and they resolved those. So that just means that the teachers are getting more, and they actually asked for less students, just like they kind of did for in California. I didn't really pay much attention to the results of any of the California teachers union stuff, but basically, generally the way that teachers go is they ask for less work and more money. Wow. I mean, that's actually kind of similar to a lot of people who work in the free market, or not really free market. I'll call it the quasi free market that exists. It's not a free market. We'll just say the market. But that's kind of what people want in the market too, and that's largely the fault of how we're told. I mean, it didn't used to actually be that you wanted to earn more for less. Now it's quite a common thing for people to want to earn more for doing less. Personally, if I'm earning a lot of money, I would feel guilty after a while if I didn't feel like I had earned it. Now, of course, other people might have different feelings about what they want to do for earning, what they feel is an earning capacity. That's certainly subjective. But personally, for me, if I feel like I could do more and I'm not doing more and I'm getting more, I feel like I'm actually taking from, I'm taking from an employer or customers or something like that. So I would feel personally wrong. Well, I would, my principles would be offended. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this video. I'll probably go, like I said, I'll probably go in further into more of what my belief on volunteerism is. It's not, it's not some sort of thing of like that I'm actually a capitalist type of deal. I mean, I am personally, but I also believe that capitalism is also the free market of ideas. It includes things like allowing people to have a socialist type of system that's non-government, or at least in the capacity where it's 100% consented to by that populace who agree to those sets of rules within that particular society. Anyway, so with that being said, let's go to the title here. We said leftist activists, talking about the left and right paradigms here. There was no forcing by actual violence here. This is kind of just like, hyperbole. This is what Donald Trump does a lot of, and people call it lies. Maybe it's lies. The lies are kind of subjective when it gets down to hyperbole. But this is certainly hyperbole here, where leftist activists, and calling leftist activists, that's kind of hyperbole too. We don't really know 100% for sure, especially when you might kind of not correctly define what leftism is. But anyway, force MasterCard to vote on banning the far right. Well, far right, again, subjective. Gotta properly define your terms here. It depends upon what the far right really is. I mean, like I said, if we're talking about, an actual governmental spectrum, then the far right would not really work here in this case for this particular situation. Actually, however, I think in this video, Tim Pool actually does involve some labeled anarchists. I'm not sure if those people can necessarily be qualified as anarchists. I don't know enough about those people that will be later mentioned. You'll see it further in the video, but I would say that those people might be put more on the far right if they actually are people who are not pro-government, don't want any government. So even in this title here, you can see a lot of fallacies with this, but obviously in titles, it's to get people's attention, and there's not a whole lot of complete truth and detail to it. So let's go ahead and go on. It's a 12-minute video. We're not going to play the whole thing. We're going to just play the opening part and then skip over to his closing analysis and kind of get into the actual meat of this. And the following will actually be more closer to, well, I hope it will be more closer to what it is. Like I said, this was a debut episode. Obviously had a little introduction about me and my feelings on certain aspects, and to describe where I come from, because that will be important when we get on later in the video. So let's go ahead and go on.
A far-left activist organization called The Sum of Us has successfully forced MasterCard to announce a vote that would allow them to ban the far-right and even politicians from using their service. MasterCard is set to hold a shareholder meeting where they will vote on whether or not they should appoint a human rights committee that will evaluate those who use its service. The intention? Ban the far...
Okay. So, first of all, this happened about a week ago, so I haven't actually really looked into whether or not MasterCard has actually held this vote. So, I don't know about any updates of this. At the point when this is uploaded to YouTube and other places, I'm not I'm not sure what it would be at either. So just to point that out, that this might have actually come to some resolution. Again, this is a private company, at least quasi private company. Nobody forced them to have this vote. They were encouraged to have this vote. I'm sure. I mean, you can label them as leftist activists. I'm sure, just to put labels, but nobody forced MasterCard to do this by any violence. And actually, now that I think about it, this is a good point to actually go into about how I feel about whether or not a private or a public company. That's actually the other thing, is MasterCard technically is a public company, not a private company. I mean, it has private companies can have boards too, but it's a publicly owned company. It's got stock, so I could own stock in MasterCard and technically be an owner of MasterCard. So it's a publicly owned company. There's a little bit of a difference there. Technically, it's private to just say that it's private from government management, although technically that's not entirely true too, especially because it's finance. Finance has a whole lot of government oversight and control over, so it's not entire. And this is actually one of the reasons why this is kind of occurring here, is because, I mean, there really are not a lot of credit card choices, are there? I mean, I'd say most big banks actually have an option for being able to trade this fake electronic currency. But they can be in forms of credit or debit, I suppose. But largely, they still use MasterCard and Visa's processing aspects. I mean, when you get a debit card from Wells Fargo or something like that, it's gonna have the Visa logo on it. So even banks who had the capacity to trade money from one place to another don't even they're required to use basically the two main payment processors that exist, and even PayPal, right? PayPal really actually uses MasterCard and Visa and stuff like that. They just use the internet as a way to process it, So it's still really using MasterCard and Visa type deal. I think though PayPal it might have its own actual individual separate payment system. I'm not entirely sure. I don't really actually use a whole lot of PayPal. But with that being said, the issues here are that because regulations have been created to actually limit the amount of competition available, and so if Tim Pool has such a problem with this, why can't he go out and create his own? Because that was too expensive. Well, yeah, it's too expensive. There's a reason it's too expensive. They want it to be too expensive so they can limit the competition. Ugh. But then, on top of that, I mean, it's not ideally expensive if you can just go ahead and get the information on how to start a payment process. But it's protected by the government, essentially, so that you have to essentially invent your own processing system that's separate from. But see, the thing is, with a patent system, what it does is essentially it patents ideas. So payment processors, I mean, that's an idea. A payment processor, that's an idea. And so you can't invent another way to do the same thing. You have to invent a new way to do a different thing, right? So it's I'm not really even sure. I mean, because credit cards have been around for a while. It's probably not even like patented anymore. I mean, maybe like the internet stuff and the more digital things might be patented. I'd have to look into it. I'm not sure how much patent stuff has in it, but patent stuff is most certainly a monopoly, and that stuff is written into our Constitution. Patents, copyrights, things like trade secrets and stuff like that. That stuff is like within our basis of our law, and it creates monopolies. It creates monopolies from the get-go. I mean, like medicinal patents, get 17 years or something like that, and plus more. I mean, they'll probably be able to argue to get more or somehow get more in some ways. And then, copyrights, that's 75 years? So these create monopolies. And, these are, because in order to be able to be sold on the proper market, the proper market being in quotes, they essentially have to follow these rules pretty well. Otherwise, you're selling it on the quote-unquote black market. And then when they find out that you're doing that, they don't like that. Why? Well, I mean, again, it creates monopolies. You can say, well, but it's needed because people wouldn't create things and make things. Yeah, well, I don't see that to be true. I can see that on YouTube, that, you're not able to, especially because YouTube will actually take your copyright from you. Technically, they can, because they give you a standard YouTube license. When you publish something on YouTube, you might be the actual controller of that on the YouTube channel. However, I think YouTube could actually use the license that they give you for themselves because you're publishing it on their platform. So they automatically have a copyright to your content. And so by that, they own your content. They can take it from you anytime they want. They don't do that because that's their kind of thing, is to let you have content as long as you don't take other people's content. But see, the thing is, even most independent YouTube content creators, they don't really care if other people take their content. In fact, they like it. Most of them say, well, this is great because it actually provides attention for me. And yeah, it does. It's actually a great way to make money. Or get more attention anyway. And then make more money in turn. To be able to do that. Like I'm now doing. I'm showing Tim Pool. Anybody who sees this who doesn't know about Tim Pool prior, now knows about Tim Pool. And they can go and look at Tim Pool's content, and maybe they'll spend some money on Tim Pool. And so it ideally provides more attention to Tim Pool. More or less. And then provides attention for me. And so that's, in my opinion, that's my payment. Is that I get to create something that, yeah, it might not be something I invented, but I created something that has other content on it that other people created in order to give them some publicity and some attention. I think that it's absolutely useful. But anyway, I'm going off on an entirely different tangent than I really like. And if I didn't already say this is going to be rather common for me to do that. This is, like I said, a podcast format, or I'd like to call it a podcast format, and I might actually end up putting it on a podcast. I eventually might actually want to start using a internet podcast radio type of deal and have music playing too, and I'll follow the rules and like try to make sure that I'm not violating any copyright stuff. But I'd like to kind of get into kind of like the whole radio aspect, and it's actually very interesting because I've been told I have a radio voice. I don't really quite see it that way. Maybe other people do. I mean, I think it's kind of subjective, the way that I tend to think what a radio voice is like. I don't really consider mine, but I've been told that my radio voice, that I've had a radio voice since, I was probably like 14, I'd say. And it's actually very interesting. I used to actually have the highest kind of voice, and then I kind of trained myself because I was a little shy and whatnot, and so I kind of trained myself to have a little bit of a deeper voice because I was kind of more doing it not really to impress people, but just kind of I was a little shy, so I it's kind of complicated. But I mean, like basically, I got a incredibly deeper voice from the time that I was like 12 to 13. It could have been puberty, and probably it was a large aspect of that. But I think I had already passed puberty by then. I don't know. Maybe I hadn't. I don't really recall. I don't really care. It wasn't really that big of a deal to me. I mean, it's kind of like one day I looked down and I had a bunch of hair in places I didn't have hair before. And then one day I also was a little bit taller than I had been. I had been like 4'11" for, God, the longest time. At least my friends used to make fun of me for that. I was 4'11" for probably like 3 years straight. And then all of a sudden I shot up to like 5'6", and then by the next year I'm at no, about 5'10", more or less. That's what I'll say. Sometimes it's 5'10" and 3/4, depending upon how you measure it. So not really all that tall, but apparently I'm tall enough to be taller than a lot of people. So, but not tall enough to really be that tall. It's kind of a interesting predicament because I'm kind of like in the middle where I'm taller than people. I apparently appear menacing to people in some, well, not necessarily menacing in a bad way, but like that I'm apparently big, and I don't really see myself as big. A lot of people see me as big, but that's just their perception. But with that being said, like I said, I go off on tangents like I am now. That's just the way I am. And so, it's going back to this MasterCard thing. They have so much influence with the government to be able, and we can see this, by using the government, because the government has all these regulations on banking and financing and stuff like that, that it's damn near impossible to really start up anything anymore. And then to be able to do that, you have to have millions and millions of dollars, or you have to know people, and so it's such a difficult thing to be able to do it, and it shouldn't be. But of course, then you have people like Tim Pool who says, well, it's necessary. But then this shit happens. So is it necessary? I guess we'll continue to go on, because Tim Pool will be a big person I will be focusing on for this particular show. I've got other people. I'll put some other people that are on the right, because, and in this case, I'm actually using the political right, not the governmental right, just for the sake of the United States of America. Of course, these people, subjective, saying left and right. That's why it's always so bad to say left and right, because people have different views on different sorts of things. I mean, I'd say, like, if you take a look at Styx Hexenhammer, if anybody knows who he is, I really like the dude. Again, like, I generally like people having opinions and whatnot. I value people's opinions a lot. Sometimes even just a little kernel of what they say is valuable to my insight. And so even if I don't like 99% of what they say, that 1% is enough for me to give them attention. And sometimes I get a little frustrated with some of their logic. Just as like they probably would get frustrated with my logic. But see, the thing is that in many cases, you can't really. I mean, okay, I know I'm being kind of maybe obtuse about this, but I would have to say that really, at this point, the way that I've been kind of practicing speaking about my beliefs to other people, and kind of like, I don't know if I really call them practice, but and they're kind of like unwanting individuals who, and they really don't. Some of them are okay with it, but most of them kind of don't like me for it. Sometimes they actually they get pretty upset. And it's kind of actually hard to think a little bit more clearly when they're getting upset, because they get really passionate and get upset. They actually get upset. I mean, I can get passionate, but I don't generally get upset. I mean, I might raise my voice, but it's not in the sense of like that I'm angry. It's more of just because I'm getting passionate. I mean, and I've been told this lots of times. Like, oh, you're getting louder. Can you please quiet down? Yeah, I'll try, but it's probably going to end back up again. Yeah. Just 30 seconds later, my voice is back up again, and I'm sure it is probably coming up, going up and down at this particular time. I can kind of see it on my kind of like just the decibel measure thing, because I'm great at terminology and the aspects of audio. So anyway, where was I? See, that's why going on these tangents can sometimes make me lose track. Well, let's just backtrack and go to the topic of this video. I mean, like with the financing stuff, I gotta have to say it's not free market if you as an individual are not capable of easily setting up your own competition. That's the way I see it. If you can't easily set up your competition, not because of the fact that these entities are actually themselves trying to stop you from doing it, because they can't really stop you from doing it. They can probably try to, in this case, like stop other people from trying to finance you, but you might actually find somebody to finance you. You have that opportunity if you can convince somebody to finance you, and you pretty much will always have that opportunity, even if you were to take the government out of it, and you have these big businesses that are trying to keep you from competing. And then the other fact is that you don't actually just need one investor. You can go ahead and do like a crowdfunding, right? I mean, crowdfunding. If you go up on a crowdfunding saying I'm going to start a payment processing that will be able to not deny people for any political reasons or any reasons at all, deny them service. Yeah, I think you'll probably find many people who'd want to get in on that. And Tim Pool doing this kind of fear mongering with this would actually really help with that kind of thing. So there will always be available investors. And yeah, you could say, well, then, like on the crowdfunding websites, they might use like MasterCard or Visa to help the payment processes, and so that would stop. Well, okay, well then just set up a PO box and say, well, hopefully that money that they tried to use for the crowdfunding went back and was refunded. And so as long as it was, you can set up a PO box and get money delivered to the PO box. You can do things like that. Have like cash or checks sent or whatever to the PO box, and you can raise money that way. Or you can have it sent to your house if you're that brave enough to do so. And yeah, I will admit, yeah, that a PO box is with the government. I mean, because the Postal Service is a government entity. So it's an independent government business. The government itself is technically a business. It's just not a free market type of business, because it generally uses violence to get its way and to get money and to provide services. It uses violence to do that. So it's not quite the same thing as a voluntary free market where coercion is not used. So I do understand that aspect. So of course, you could always argue that eventually, like, a big business could probably, but you can see how much they'd have to control. They'd actually have to control a lot. I mean, so even if you're getting money sent to a PO box to start up your own MasterCard business, or MasterCard competitive business, that you can see how much they would have to try to control and be incredibly expensive. Or maybe, I don't know. I mean, technically the thing is, you could set up your own PO box system, right? I mean, who's going to be able to stop you from maybe just you yourself being a delivery person and just having a locker, and you deliver stuff to that locker? What's to stop you from that? Or I'll tell you what, there could be so many solutions. Who knows what the solutions are? Governments don't really provide solutions that aren't already there. Government generally. I mean, maybe there are certain cases where they might provide solutions that aren't there. I mean, you could argue that without the government, we wouldn't have internet, right? Well, you could also argue that without somebody in the market making computers, which the government didn't make or invent, you wouldn't have internet too. You could go back as far as that. You could go back as far as the what is that Abaca or whatever it's called, the little counting thing. You could go back as far as that. Of course, that might have actually been created by government, or at least had some sort of government involvement. I mean, everything these days has government involvement, and of course you can say, well, these people would not have been able to make computers without government education. Except for, you can go back to like the late 1800s, and even have maybe like a woman who knows how to code in certain kind of like counting type of machines. And the reality is that most people were self-made, self-learned, even back in the 1890s. And so, I mean, just like even kind of today, a lot of the billionaires for the tech, that they basically are self-made in many aspects, where they incredibly smart tech people who maybe did go to college, right? I mean, even Steve Jobs went to college, but they dropped out. So, like actually being educated, like, through a school, doesn't actually, it's not the only way to get educated. You can educate yourself. Abraham Lincoln educated himself. I mean, he did go to some schools, but he ended up not being able to go to schools because he lived in a cabin in the wilderness. It was incredibly difficult to get there, and at some point the school that he was going to, I think, shut down or something like that. But so largely he had to learn how to do what he wanted to do on his own. And this was as being a child. So if as children, even back then, that they could be that self-reliant essentially, and maybe they use some neighbors to help them out from time to time too, because they're children. I mean, of course, even as adults, sometimes you use neighbors to help you out, and friends and stuff like that to help you out, and family members. So just being an adult doesn't actually mean that you don't need help or can't use help. And just like being a child, it could be a similar situation. Of course, with a child with like pretty much zero experience in something, you're going to need a whole lot of help, or you're just going to trial and error, which is how you do it in the first place anyway if you're an adult and you don't have anybody to help you. So anyway, the point is that you don't really need government to help you learn. You don't need government to help you make things, because it's the individuals who come up with the ideas how to make stuff and how to do things, and maybe even collectively within a group of people they can do that. But with government, they don't really actually come up with these ideas. Other people come up with the ideas, and the government tries them out essentially. So, and then of course, if you think about it, the government is made up of people. These people could operate within the market themselves. They don't have to be working for the government to make something. Without some of these people who know how to do things, or are capable of trying to do things, and are brave enough to learn to do things and test things out and stuff like that, you can actually do that without the government. Because that's just, in this case, I'm not talking about the government being people as in the people of the people the government controls. I'm actually talking about the people working for the government in this case. And so those people, they are actually literal human beings, and they are the ones who are learning how to do the things that government could possibly claim to be the ones to have designed things. That those people could have designed them because they were humans. They could have designed them without the government. Didn't need the government to do that. It just so happened that it was done by the government, so it could have been done without the government. Is what my point is. And didn't need to use violence to take money from people, and or at least because even if you were to print money, that's another thing that's monopolized. Though you're not allowed to make any competing money, and you can see with the cryptocurrency that's becoming an actual thing that's actually more stronger in value than the dollar. There's a reason for that, because it's actually got competing cryptocurrencies with that too, as well, and it's popular. Is valued. So even if it's something that's there can be a lot of it. If it's valued, the price goes up. Especially, and the price goes up even if the quantity is low, especially because if the quantity is high and it's still valued, it can still be pretty valuable, but it might not be as valuable as if there was less. Because usually, if there's less, it's a whole lot more valuable than if there was more. But with that being said, people are tired of using government currency. That's the whole idea of cryptocurrency, because government currency is worthless. And, we could go back to like a gold standard, but we're technically on somewhat of a gold standard, even in the entire world. It's not just here in the United States. We're on a gold standard. It's not called gold, it's called petroleum. That our dollars are backed up by petroleum is kind of more of a fiat, because what they've done is they've negotiated with this company called OPEC. Well, it's not company, it's a group of countries that includes like Russia, not Russia. Actually, it might be Russia's on there. It's like Iran, Iraq, Syria, pretty much all the places that America wants to go to war with. Venezuela is one of them. A lot of the Middle Eastern and Northern African places. I could be wrong about Russia being on there, but what Russia does want to do is actually create their own. They don't want to create their own currency, so to speak. They want to get off the dollar, and so does China too. So that can also be a reason, because it ties into it regardless of whether or not they are actually OPEC countries. They're probably not OPEC countries. I'm kind of stupid when it comes to this kind of stuff. I know of OPEC, and I know of the main countries. Are usually people qualify the Saudi Arabia to be the crowned king of OPEC, and which could be one reason why Trump is so pro Saudi Arabia, even though he probably shouldn't be so pro Saudi Arabia. But with that being said, we're on somewhat of a gold standard. It's a fake gold standard, because it could go away at any time, and it's always threatened to go away. Currently, right now, there can be other ways where they control the Gulf over there, so they control what kind of oil goes out there, and so if they control the amount of oil that goes out, and they don't put as much oil out, then the price goes up, way up. Or they could just say, "Oh, well, we're not dealing in dollars anymore. You have to buy it in euros." Or we're dealing with Russia now. You have to buy it in rubles. I think that's what the Russian currency is. Is it rupees? I don't. Okay. Well, but anyway, it's on somewhat of a gold standard. Because it's kind of backed, but it's not. See, if you actually had gold or something of actual physical value to trade it for the paper, then it would actually be of value, whereas it would be more stable as long as you actually have that actual physical metal or whatever you're backing it up with. But it's not even really kind of the case with the petroleum. It's called the petrodollar. If you want to look it up, it's actually a thing. I think that most people are kind of somewhat aware of it. And that's kind of how our wars go now these days, is that it's not about taking oil. It might be a little bit with Venezuela, and it might be a little bit with some of this stuff. But for the most part, it's not about actually taking the oil. It's about keeping the value of the dollar, because that's more important than actually taking the resource of the oil. Of course, if you took all the oil, which most of the world would not like if you actually went in and just took all the oil, so that would be a difficult thing to actually do without a lot of protests from the rest of the world. So it's not a feasible thing to go in and start taking oil from countries and profiting for that. And so, people already kind of perceive it as that, but since it's not actually really happening, at least to the visible eye, people are generally kind of like, whatever kind of deal. Sort of. They don't like it, but it's still kind of like they're not really in a major protest for it because again, it's kind of like hidden with amongst the dollar. The reality is that you make money by being able to print up as much money as you can, or type in as many zeros into your bank account as you can, without having that value really deteriorate. And so the best way that you can keep it from deteriorating without backing it up with gold that you're just going to go ahead and sell out to other people instead of keeping it in a vault. And one of the actual reasons is to go off on a tangent, kind of, is one of the reasons why the gold started disappearing was because of wars. It was not necessarily because like private banks were like giving out a bunch of gold. I mean, in some cases, yes, but largely it had to do with wars. That the gold disappeared because most of that gold would be given as investment to pay for wars for the government. So, and I mean, you can even look at it even with the case of like in the instance of the late 1800s. I mean, there were lots of financial problems because of the Civil War, and then all the fighting with natives and stuff like that. And then, of course, in the late 1800s, there was the Cuban American War, Spanish American War. I mean, with the Roosevelt Rough Riders type of deal, where this was actually volunteers who went before the official military, and they pretty much cleared everything up instead of the official military really actually doing anything. But that was the Spanish American War was actually started because of government and also because of fake news. Actually, it was at this point it was actually called yellow journalism, and they kind of created a sob story, kind of like they're creating sob stories now, right? But they kind of created a sob story about a young female from Cuba who had been essentially kidnapped and raped and brutalized and stuff like that. And it actually turns out that none of that really actually happened. And then that didn't really actually work initially, so they actually had to create an instance which is even arguable about what was the name of that ship that was in the like harbor of Cuba and it blew up, right? Well, there's a lot of evidence afterwards to point to the fact that, I mean, this could be a conspiracy theory, but I would more agree with this particular point because it's kind of like the history of the government, anyways, especially with the Gulf of Tonkin and other aspects, not just that, but and the also like the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I wouldn't really put much value in the evidence that a government has in order to go to war. I would find that they would probably fabricate a lot of that evidence because that's the history. Fabricate evidence to go to war. But anyway, it was essentially investigated that later on after the war actually occurred that the ship had just blown up internally, and it was not able to be proven that, and if it was blown up internally, that means that because this was a naval ship, a military ship, that they were very inept people because their security sucked. And then if it was some sort of like spy or whatever who came on and blew it up, or it was just a mistake, or it was completely fabricated. So I would go on the more side as completely fabricated. Well, I'm sure that the ship actually blew up, but I think that it blew up at the plan of either government or agents working for the government, not the Spanish government. I don't think that the Spanish government really actually wanted to go to war with America. They were really trying not to. If you really go back and look at the diplomacy that was occurring back then, they were trying to avoid going to war at any cost. But anyway, So I'm going on talking about something that has nothing to do with this video. So I'm going to actually have to say I lied earlier. So this is going to be a format. I don't want this to be the format where I kind of go on this tangent. I want to try to keep it as short as possible because I haven't even gone 30 seconds into this video. So into the Tim Pool video. So let's go ahead and continue on. Except for I'm just going to re-add the point so I can get my mind back on track here. That MasterCard has the ability to do this shit because the government pretty much keeps somebody like Tim Pool or me from being able to make our own fucking MasterCard competition. I think that's the real point that you got to look at. Is that why can't Tim Pool or why can't I or why can't anybody really actually create a competition that is going to actually include everybody instead of banning people for their beliefs and opinions? But I digress. Let's move on.
Right, white supremacists, and even politicians from being able to receive money. This may be the most dramatic escalation in the culture war we've seen yet. Far-left activists have targeted social media networks to get you banned. They've targeted Patreon, PayPal, even Chase Bank has banned conservatives from holding bank accounts. But now they want to take away your ability to even use a debit card, and this could have a global impact.
So as you can see, like earlier, he was actually talking about the Chase Bank there. Again, now there is actually quite a bit of competition with banks. A lot more competition than actually is something like a credit card. However, you still, as somebody like Tim Pool or me, cannot easily set up our own bank. It should be very simple. You should be able to go to your neighbor and say, hey, I'm starting a bank. You want to put some money in the bank account? I'll give you like 20% interest every year. You should be able to do that, right? You don't need some actual, because being a bank, you get people investing in you. The people who own bank accounts with you are the investors, generally speaking. And then what you tend to do is you would take that bank account money and then give out loans. Or invest it into other things. And yeah, it's a risk. But that's the point of the bank. How are you going to be able to make money as a bank if you're just holding people's money? You need to be able to invest, and it's a risk. You know, as a person, a patron of a bank, you take that risk when you give up your money to a bank. And that's either your stupidity or just because you can be giving it to something like Bank of America, who just uses the government to go ahead and bail them out, or, you know, Wells Fargo as well. And I'm actually kind of one of those stupid people. The thing is like, you know, as a poor person, or somebody who doesn't have something like, you know, $10,000 to dispose of, because I think you need something like $10,000 or more to be able to have an account that doesn't charge a fee. So that actually is what occurs here, is that they'll charge you like, I don't know, I think Wells Fargo charges like $10 a month or something like that. I don't know, they might have changed it. But they charge like $10 a month for you to give them your money so that they can make money off of that. I mean, it's understandable. But the way that I see it, if you're charging a fee, you should not be allowed to use that money to invest. Because now I'm paying you to essentially rent space for my money in your bank. And so, you know, if you rent a place, that actually, you know, you don't get charged extra for having your property or you in there. That's just kind of the agreement when you're renting space, right? Is that space is kind of actually yours and they don't actually touch it. Well, they can touch it. Usually it's in the case of fixing things or kicking you out. So, I'd say it's kind of a rental, you know, if you're paying a bank fee. But at the same time, that bank can go ahead and use your money to go ahead and especially because it's, there's this thing called the FDIC, and what it is a government insurance, right? And so the government backs it up, and they back it up with your money, the money that the bank just took from you and then lost, right? So how do you figure that, right? How can if everybody gives their money to a bank or to all the banks that lose all of that money, and then the money that the government can't afford to give anyway goes ahead to bail those banks out, and it just goes to the banks. You don't, the people who lost their money, they don't get their money back. That's the way it's supposed to work with the insurance, but that's not how it works with government insurance. I mean, the Medicare and Medicaid, those aren't actually insurances. Those are what are they called? They don't operate the same way. You're not actually guaranteed to it. I'm thinking of Social Security. Actually, not the Medicare and Medicaid, although it might apply to those things too. There's no really actually obligation or guarantee that you actually can get those, and that's pretty true. Even if you pay for them, you don't actually. There's no guarantee of you actually getting them. So, like for instance, if you earn a certain amount of money, of course, even if you from your retirement or whatever, if you earn a certain amount of money from your retirement, you have to pay more for your Medicare or Medicaid, even if you no longer have a job. You still have to pay more because your retirement is counting as income if it's a separate private retirement from Social Security. And then on top of that, if you receive a whole lot of retirement, you receive less Social Security. So Social Security insurance, you're not paying in to receive what you paid in. No, that's not how it works. So you pretty much, more or less, don't get your money. You don't get what you paid in. Like Cenk Uygur likes to say, well, you pay into it, so you get you get what you pay for. No, that's not how it works. Especially not with government. And these are kind of obvious things. I mean, I guess I should provide proof for that, but I think these are actually pretty apparent things. I think most people are kind of aware of how this works here, especially with Social Security, is that it doesn't work where you actually put your money in and actually get your money back. That'd be kind of stupid. Just give me my money, let me keep my money in the first place, and maybe I can actually put it in a retirement. I mean, the idea was that people weren't putting stuff in retirement, but that was because the Social Security insurance started back in the 30s when people didn't have money because of the Depression, and the Depression occurred because of the poor monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, on top of the poor government spending policies of the Republicans and the Democrats, because they were way overspending. And then on top of that, it was from the incentivizing. Well, this is on the monetary policy. No. I should say the tariffs and taxes that occurred, and many other reasons that were basically government reasons for the most part, government incentives or the cause of government. Because you could look at the Federal Reserve as technically supposed to be independent, right? It's really stupid though to say that it's independent, and then you have this. The Secretary of Treasury kind of is chosen by the government, and the people on the board, the Federal Reserve Board, they're chosen by the government. So it's just a way to take away responsibility from the government, essentially, by saying, well, it's independent. Well, maybe on paper it may appear independent, but by technically, on its face value, when you look at it, it's not independent. And now, of course, Alan Greenspan will tell you different, that it doesn't matter who's in office, that as long as the Federal Reserve stays independent, he's happy. Because whatever the government does has no correspondence to what the Federal Reserve does, which is false. The Federal Reserve, in conjunction with the government, operates kind of together, And so anytime that there's a crappy market, you can blame the government and the Federal Reserve. Of course, people don't. They blame the market. They say it's the market's fault. Well, I mean, no, not really. It's the government's fault, because a lot of the time what they do is they'll go ahead and bring that Federal Reserve rate, because how the Federal Reserve mostly operates is by just like, I mean, it does many other things too, but its basic function is to control the interest rates. And so if it lowers the interest rates down to zero, then basically what occurs is a whole bunch of money printing has to go, or typing of money into bank accounts has to occur, because all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of money that people want to exchange hands with, because there's incentives, because interest rates are low, so therefore profits are going to be high, because you're going to have, and I mean, you think like, if you raise interest rates it would increase profits. Well, not necessarily, because you're going to have a decrease of the amount of customers, and so when you have a decrease of amount of customers, you actually have a decrease of the amount of overall money typically. And so when you're able to increase the amount of customers is when you're actually able to increase your profits. Especially because especially with investment, the more people you have investing, the more that you can invest in a bigger investment, and so therefore you can potentially make even more from that. And so if you have people who don't want to invest because the interest rates are too high, well, you're not going to be making a whole bunch of money. Plus, more money is being taken out of the economy. That's actually the simplistic view of what happens with the rates that the Federal Reserve does, is that when it's lowered, it increases spending and increases the amount of money in the economy. And then when the interest rate is raised, it decreases spending and decreases the amount of money in the economy. I mean, technically it decreases the amount of money in the economy, and then so it decreases spending, because the more money that is in the economy, in this case, the more money that is spent. So more or less. So anyway, the point here is that with Social Security, they were saying, blaming that people couldn't save before. Well, people used to save, and it used to mean something before the Federal Reserve, because it could actually potentially have some more value. But as soon as the Federal Reserve was created in 1913 and inflation went sky high, essentially, it decreased the value of saving for poor people. So, I mean, like, you could save $1 one day, but the next year that dollar's worth 90 cents, at least for its purchasing power. Still a dollar. A dollar, right? But what is capable of purchasing is the issue here. This is so. I mean, so technically here, what some people can receive Social Security right now, at least the working class, they can receive, depending upon when they actually get Social Security, they can receive something like maybe $5,000 a month. That's a pretty good chunk of change. However, if that doesn't change to a higher portion and meet up with inflation, by the time that, let's say, Social Security is still available, by the time that I was to take Social Security, and I was only able to get $5,000 a month, $5,000 a month in, I'm about 30 years old, so $5,000 a month in about 40 years. I don't think $5,000 a month in 40 years at this current rate of the way the purchasing power goes is going to be very good. I mean, right now, you got like a small bag of chips that's like $2. I remember 10 years ago it was like 50 cents. That's like a 200% increase in just like 10 years. I mean, actually, I'd probably say even 5 years ago you could get the same size bag of chips for 50 cents. And I mean, obviously that's kind of an anecdotal thing, because it's a particular item that is not. I mean, because like other items have been like near $2 or close to $2 and haven't really changed much in that particular aspect, other than occasionally going on sale for less. Like, let's say, for instance, like a bottle of soda. In my area, it's like been $1.89 for probably like 5 years. However, it's gonna likely to go up, and one of the actual aspects, especially in a particular city called Boulder, Colorado, they have this thing called a sugar tax. And listening to some of the people who say that who live in Boulder and and they voted for the sugar tax, they basically voted for something that they didn't actually believe was actually the case. So they were either fooled or misled or whatever, because they actually thought that what was actually being taxed was not on per ounce of the soda, but per gram of the sugar. Not that that's necessarily any better. Still a bunch. I mean, especially because there's like a lot of grams and, several dozen grams of sugar in like a Coke bottle. So, um, it still would be, if you're averaging out about 2 cents per gram, that's probably going to be more than the actual bottle. But with that being said, at the same point, it's still been rather expensive for some of these poor working class people. And so, to some aspects, yeah, they said they actually stopped drinking it, sort of. They actually just started going to different cities that don't have the sugar tax to get stuff, or they actually figured out some of the loopholes, because some of these beverages, because the sugar tax is on the beverages. Some of the beverages actually are exempt. They get kind of like a privileges from the state, from being able, state in this case being the city of Boulder, from being able to, and this is obviously not a free market thing, right? When you have this tax, it actually increase the cost, and the way that this actual tax works is it actually puts the cost on the vendors, right? That was the idea, was that the vendors were supposed to absorb the tax. It was supposed to put the tax on the vendors. But of course, what the vendors are going to do, just like they do with any tax that they're charged, is that they're going to actually put the cost on the consumer. And this should have been obvious. So therefore, what you're actually doing is not actually making a free market. This is not a free market thing where you're actually having a tax that actually affects the cost of an item. And so now that these items are generally the ones that have sugar in them, that if it's natural sugar, it's fine. If it's processed sugar and high fructose corn syrup, it gets taxed. Now, with some caveats, though, because, like, for instance, I guess it's just the glitches in the systems. There's certain items that are able to bypass that. And there might be more than some people are aware of, but currently, right now, just certain items that I'm aware of. But anyway, so this was just the stupidity of the people. So this is, because people voted for this. And in fact, actually, I'd actually have to say that the politicians in the government were actually not happy about having to enforce this. They thought it would actually be quite a detriment to the actual businesses. And it is. It is a detriment to some of the businesses. It might not be a detriment to something like a big name business like a Kroger or something like that, or a Safeway. But if you're going to have a local grocery mart that, just like a Family Mart or something like that, it would have a significant effect, because with a Family Mart, generally their prices are actually a little bit higher, typically, because they're not able to get sometimes they are, but they're generally not able to get cheaper prices like Kroger and Safeway and whatnot, because they're not able to buy as much volume. So they have to raise costs with their aspects, so they can't really quite compete very easily there. Maybe some can. I'm not really entirely sure about the aspects of that. I don't really go to family markets, largely because they don't really exist anymore. But there might be like some specialty, like Mexican market type deals and Asian markets and stuff like that, but generally, at least for traditional American family markets, they don't really exist anymore. And that's generally the fault of, the government. I can list off all the reasons why that is. Is it necessarily a bad thing? I don't know. Maybe it could have happened in a natural free market. I don't have a problem with actual monopolies in a natural free market, because one of the reasons that natural monopoly in the free market would likely to be exist is because the consumers are just fine with it. I mean, you could say, well, maybe the monopoly is capable of stopping people from making competitions. Well, if it's stopping people from making competitions, are they doing it through force? If they're doing it through force, that's kind of immoral, and most people wouldn't like that. But if they're doing it by buying people out, well, that's kind of the choice of the market, right? I suppose. Or the other aspect, but buying people out would be expensive, and it would raise costs, and the consumers wouldn't like it. So, which means that it would eventually even out at some point. It would eventually even out to a bunch of other businesses existing, because they would be able to have a market, because maybe they would be able to have a way to lower prices for the high prices of the monopoly. And again, like I said, a monopoly is not necessarily an inherent bad thing. Again, it can be a natural monopoly. And it can be a natural monopoly because the consumers are just fine with the way it works. I mean, maybe the prices are just fine and affordable, and that the business, generally does pretty well for the community, and so it can be just fine. I mean, generally, most communities create monopolies. I mean, especially here in Colorado, because Colorado was really weird with its liquor stuff, as opposed to a lot of the rest of the country. Except for the rest of the country with its liquor is actually even worse, because it actually uses government, state run. And in this state, it's actually talking about state of Arizona, state of Virginia, or whatever, where those states actually run the alcohol. They monopolize the alcohol themselves and make money from the alcohol themselves for the most part. And so that's actually still kind of like a big trend. But Colorado, I guess, was a little bit better in the aspect of that we don't actually have state-run alcohol, in the sense of that the state of Colorado sells alcohol, state-run alcohol, and the fact that it's regulated so that people can only sell certain alcohol. So, and then also there's business licenses that require only a certain amount of liquor vendors in a particular area. That was actually what it used to be prior to this microbrew stuff, because there's these popular microbrews that was coming up, and that's one of the reasons why the law changed, because these popular Colorado microbrews were coming up, and grocery stores were not really selling microbrews, because the microbrews were actually above 3.2 generally. So they basically changed the law to start facilitating bringing in, allowing for chain grocery stores to start selling higher than 3.2% beer. Still can't sell liquor, still can't sell wine. So you got to go to the monopolized section, which is for the local business. So, I mean, do I have an issue with this? I mean, yes, I do, because it's a government-run monopoly through private business. But as a factor of, do I want a big grocery corporate chain selling alcohol? Well, sure. If I can pay less, for sure, because I'm always wanting to pay less. I'm wanting to pay less for more. So absolutely, I am down for letting grocery chains do that, because generally, in the aspect, as long as the government stays the fuck out of that shit, the prices go down. But because government fucks around with shit, especially with gas and stuff like that, prices go up, and minimum wage and other aspects, prices go up. And it's kind of the unfortunate aspect. I mean, if you look at things like minimum wage, well, this is definitely a very screwy thing. And actually, Tim Pool, I might, if I can find some other videos, or maybe he'll say it again, because he likes to talk about his political views, especially on things like minimum wage and stuff like that. But Tim Pool is actually somewhat against minimum wage in some aspects. He says, well, I think it's necessary in some areas, but in other areas I don't think it's necessary. he also admits that he doesn't really actually know what he's talking about. So since he doesn't really know what he's talking about, he's not. He'll say a lot of the times, "I'm not really an economist, but I do have an opinion about how the economy should run." Except for the fact that if you actually go for the government agencies, especially in certain states, or for the most part in all states, to be an economist, there's no real actual education requirements. All you need to do is just, like, I don't even know if you need to have a license. You just need to be able to register with the state that you're in as an economist. You don't need any actual prior knowledge or experience to be an economist, because it's kind of like a subjective term. It's kind of hard to define economists, because there's different types of economists. I'm sure that the Keynesian economists, they might have some knowledge and aspects of the supply and demand, the supply side economics. I mean, they might have some knowledge of that, but because they don't really technically accept it, they're not really quite the experts on it, would they? Well, I mean, ideally. But anyway, the point is that there's not really there's not really any requirements for being an economist. So for Tim Pool to really say that I'm not an economist, and then start saying this is the way economy should be, well, I mean, this is exactly why I'm making a show like this, is because this is the logic of these people, right? There is no logic in that, right? To say, well, I'm not an economist, but I have this economic opinion. I think that there should be a mixed economy because you need governments to regulate, because markets won't really self-regulate. Wait, actually, if you really look at what actually occurs with when governments are regulating the market, it's actually really lobbyists telling the government to regulate themselves. I guess they could self-regulate, but they don't want to self-regulate because they don't want to self-regulate themselves. They want the whole market to be regulated so that they can control who's in the market. Of course, that's not what Temple believes, but that's certainly what is actually occurring. This is the actual truth, that the people who actually set the regulations for the market, especially, maybe not necessarily for everything, but certainly, I mean, for me, I believe it's everything. That technically it's private businesses and private individuals setting the market standards. I mean, it certainly is true for the healthcare industry that these are actually big billionaires. I mean, the Obamacare, right? The big thing about the Obamacare, what, didn't the Koch brothers set that up or something like that, right? I mean, they basically, private people working with the government, because the government doesn't know shit. Government doesn't know squat about how to operate anything. And so they basically work for the businesses, and the businesses are working for themselves, so of course they're going to benefit themselves. And not for necessarily the long term, maybe for the long term, for sure. The long term is usually the case, but it's for their individual long term, for a particular set of businesses, because they tend to work together on that. I mean, as you can see with certainly aspects of the media, right? The old guard media, they're working together for sure. With it, I mean, it's not even the case of that. You can just see it from this against the social media, or they're actually working with social media to work against people like the independent creators and independent people on the ground. But you can actually see from before, if you look at news feeds of even Fox affiliates to CNN affiliates, that their exact talking points are the exact damn same thing, pretty much, for the most part. And especially if you go to the local stations, view their local station affiliates as opposed to their talk shows like Sean Hannity versus Don Lemon type of deal. Or, I mean, I'm not saying those two actually going up against each other. I'm just really talking about the nationalized portions of these media conglomerates. Those are quite different, but they still tend to have a lot of the same talking points. Just that Fox, being still the kind of a globalist media company that wants to make as much money as possible, and actually is making a lot of money in the case of through now that the Mueller report is over and that ratings are up for Fox over some of the other non-Fox media groups. I don't consider Fox to be conservative. I go with the Sticks Hexenhammer belief as well as a few others. That Fox is really just a shithole company as well as the rest. They're just as fucking liberal as the rest, except for that they just are better at pandering to the conservatives because they do a better job at pretending to the conservatives. But at the same time, occasionally you actually have some of these other non-Fox stations actually start spitting out conservative views occasionally. And, of course, obviously, look at Tucker Carlson. In many cases for his television stuff, he comes from some of them, the so-called liberal TV stuff. So, these people who, they're just paid actors. You essentially just got to go to acting school and whatnot to be able to be an anchor. You look at like Chris Cuomo, right? He basically, he probably because of his brother, the what is it, like Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York or whatever. Chris Cuomo is a lawyer, and a lot of these people tend to be like lawyers. It's kind of odd. Lawyers, you need to be an actor too. You need to learn how to act too. Because in court, you need to learn how to lie, especially if you're a criminal defense attorney or defending your corporation. You got to learn how to lie to the judge, right? Got to be an actor. And so, being a lawyer is a good pretense for being somebody, a talking head on TV. They're all just actors. They're paid tens of millions of dollars to act, and that includes the people on Fox. They're just acting for you. When I listen to Sean Hannity, this guy sounds like an out-of-touch fucking old geek. Kind of like, the O'Reilly guy, right? God, these people on Fox are fucking old. Even the women are getting kind of old. And they're just kind of out of touch because they don't really actually know how to talk to people. They're trying to talk to people in somewhat of the way of the internet, but it's not quite the fucking same as listening to somebody on YouTube. At least in my opinion. Maybe if you guys like the way that I'm doing shit, probably not, because I've got an hour and 42 minutes going on here, and I haven't really even gotten much into this 10-pool video. And I apologize for that, but that's just the way this episode is going to be. I'm going to try not to do so much of this, or maybe you like this. Maybe you can listen to my dulcet tones in the background, so you can not be bored at your work. Or maybe I'll do it while I'm bored at work. Listen to my own voice. Yeah, because I like listening to my own voice. I cringe every time I hear my own voice. Although at the same time, it's also very amazing and fascinating, as well as cringy. Especially when I don't really talk very consistently. I'm trying to work on the not having so many uhs and ums and stuff like that. But anyway, and also not having long pauses. I gotta get my Stefan Molyneux up where I can go ahead and talk nonstop without very much mess-ups. And there I go with an O. And so, anyway, I will get back to this. I promise. I'm getting back to it right now. Because I've lost track of where I was at. Because this really gets me passionate, I swear. I'm going right now, I swear.
All the while, we are seeing a dramatic escalation in rhetoric and violence from the far left. These activist groups are escalating their efforts across all fronts today. Let's take a look at how MasterCard is responding and what these activists are trying to accomplish with this vote. But before we get started, make sure you follow me on Minds at minds.com/Timcast. The past few videos I've done have stressed the problem of censorship and its escalation, so I cannot be more serious when I say I don't trust YouTube. Make sure you follow me on Minds because they are substantially less likely to censor me if I cover controversial or sensitive topics. Again, minds.com/Timcast. If you want to support this video, just share it on social media to help spread the news. From BuzzFeed News, activists are trying to force MasterCard to cut off payments to the far right. The payment giant's shareholders will vote on a proposal to
Okay, so like I said, this is just going to get into the article, so it's just basically details. I think I said it. I screwed up initially because I'm stupid, and I started actually talking, and I got 20 minutes in and realized that I had actually muted my mic. So I may have actually said something or didn't say something, and I've forgotten because I've got two versions in my head right now. So I don't even remember what I said an hour ago. But with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and skip ahead. I'm not sure exactly where I'm gonna skip. I'll kind of just let's see. Let's come on, get to. Here we go. We'll start out right there. All right, let's go.
Groups that promoted hate and violence. And this brings me to the most important point. If MasterCard appoints this committee, it will not stop with the far right. It will extend to everybody. First Tommy Robinson, then Count Dankula, then Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, people like me. The cliff will keep eroding. Keep in mind that Donald Trump's proposals about border security.
So I actually will agree with this particular portion. Is that yeah, it would likely extend to leftist so-called groups. And I'm labeling it for the purposes of this video. It doesn't fit with my labels, but I'm doing it because this is how it's been labeled. They're all leftist groups to me if they're pro-government. But anyway, so yeah, this is a portion I would actually agree with Tim Pool. I agree with Tim Pool on a lot of things. I just don't agree on the government doing those things. So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and continue.
Security were held by Democrats 10 years ago, which means today you may hold a view. In 5 years, that view may be considered far right. But more importantly, PayPal banned anti-fascist activists. It will not stop with the right. It will impact everyone. Most importantly, it will impact everyone who opposes the establishment. The left-wing groups that tend to get censored and smeared in the media are anti-war activists, people who oppose American intervention. And further, this proposal could actually damage MasterCard to an extreme degree. This story from yesterday, Alphabet had more than $70 billion in market cap wiped out, and it says YouTube is one of the problems. The story basically talks about how YouTube is trying to police its content more and more to cater to an angry media. And that's resulting in...
Okay, so what basically Tim Pool is actually pointing to here, because of this particular article here, is that supposedly because of this, there is a $70 billion loss in Alphabet, the parent company for Google and YouTube. And they're blaming it on YouTube because of the fact that it's costing YouTube a whole lot, not just in the added costs for regulating and changing the algorithms, but also in the fact that because of what they are doing is actually decreasing overall revenue from what they originally had prior to their ad apocalypse and their demonetizations and stuff like that. So, and to this point, I would actually have to agree with Tim Pool for sure on this again too. That yeah, I would say that if MasterCard started pulling this out on a major scale, in the scale of like YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook and stuff like that, that most likely, yeah, they would probably start losing billions of dollars in funds because they would be denying themselves that. So really, the reality is that MasterCard is actually hurting themselves. I'm not sure Tim Pool gets so excited on that particular point, but I'm actually kind of excited about this because this is not going to be a long-term effective thing to go ahead and do this. And they're either going to completely have to fail because of this, God willing, they're going to completely have to fail on this, or they're going to have to realize before they completely fail that they're going to need to actually incentivize the people that they banned to come back. And I'm assuming that at some point YouTube might have to do this too if they continue to dig themselves a deeper hole in this. And not just YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. But in all likelihood, they're too in themselves and not really quite aware. They might actually be thinking that they're doing this for virtuous reasons, possibly, or they might actually be doing it for virtuous and financial reasons, while at the same time, maybe they're starting to realize that they're losing money. I mean, that's apparently what this particular article of the Alphabet losing the 70 billion, maybe they might actually be starting to realize. I kind of doubt it, that they're going to realize that what they are doing specifically is the problem. Maybe they'll find out. I don't know. I certainly hope that they find out in time, because I'll tell you what, I like the platform of YouTube. I haven't really felt too much of the censorship myself in any of the videos that I've released, but I'm really small because I really put out just a few videos every like 4 or 5 months, if that, because I'm kind of stupid that way. And again, I'll try to say that I'll do more. And it's really odd because I actually had a whole bunch of time like 4 or 5 months ago, because I didn't actually have a day job. And, well, I'm not exactly sure why I didn't actually do this. I mean, generally because I ended up sleeping in and just kind of like was not really interested in it. And because it was a lot of work, and at that particular point I was actually doing a different format where I was actually filming myself, and so, I had to doll myself up a little bit, and, well, it was just not really, at that point, something I was really wanting to do. I prefer this format, at least for this current time, until I at least have an established audience, if I can actually ever achieve that, and I'd like to achieve that, but if I don't, that's fine too. This is fun. It's kind of like talking to myself. I love talking to myself. So let us continue on here for a little bit longer here and see what else he has to say and what else I can say to call out on his ass.
Lower engagement, less views, and ultimately less ad revenue. If MasterCard decides to prioritize politics and subjective morality over providing a functioning service, it's likely they're going to cut off service to controversial groups that aren't actually that extreme. It may be a mainstream conservative like Ben Shapiro, who's repeatedly called alt-right or far-right, who sees his access to MasterCard severed because of outrage. Well, that's access to a lot of money. And over time, it's going to cut off a ton of money that MasterCard should be receiving by providing a normal service. Who will be the arbiter of what is moral and what isn't? Like I said, we've seen the left and the right banned in response to these actions. Who is going to be the person that you would decide is smart enough and just enough to determine who should be censored and who should be restricted? I do believe there needs to be a line for many corporations, but who gets to draw that line? It's very difficult. It shouldn't be in the hands of a few activists to force MasterCard to hold this vote. If the shareholders aren't properly informed about what's going on, they might just say, yes, it's a good thing to...
Okay, hold up. Man, when I saw this before, I don't really quite remember at this point. I don't really remember what exactly Tim Pool was saying here, what he was implying. He's saying, well, it shouldn't be left in the hands of a few activists. Well, they're a private company. They should be able to do this. I know this is the Tim Pool's getting tired of hearing this. Well, they're a private company. I actually do, even though this is a quasi-government market, I actually, and this is the fault of people like Tim Pool, actually. So, screw Tim Pool on this matter, because this is just the foresight that he can't see, and this is kind of like, in this particular foresight, it's kind of like the kind of foresight that these companies don't appear to have themselves. That by taking away what services that they provide to people, that they actually kind of cut out their money. So why they don't actually have this foresight, like Tim Pool doesn't have this particular foresight, that technically by creating a type of market that limits the amount of competition, and that's just purposeful intention, that you're gonna actually end up having shit like this. And this is actually not anything new, really. Just the difference is that we're all so much more connected to each other than before. So this is not really anything new at all. This is actually pretty standard that there's big companies who work together with other companies to control. I mean, like, let's go back to the Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan situations. Like, when they needed to get political moves done, they actually all worked together to get political moves done. I think they pretty much got a presidential candidate, and they actually put in Teddy Roosevelt as vice president to their chagrin. And this is how the story goes. That they were putting him in there to kind of believing that, well, when you put somebody as vice president, they actually become nothing after that. They always the bridesmaid, never the bride type of deal. At least in of course, historically that's not really true. So this kind of might just be a wrong think in this aspect, but I don't really know for sure what exactly happened here. I mean, I guess kind of historically, yeah, maybe Teddy was put in there as vice president, and then the president was assassinated. Why can't I remember the name of that president? He was assassinated by what they actually call, I think, or was that Garfield? Was Garfield the one that was killed by an anarchist? No, I mean, supposedly. I mean, like, it's kind of weird. Like, because I think the one with Garfield, though, with it, the person who killed him was actually upset at Garfield because Garfield didn't ever give him a job that he thought he was going to have. So he's just angry at that. If there was an anarchist who was actually wanting a government position, that's kind of antithetical to an anarchist position to have a government job. So, I mean, I would say that supposedly the person who killed this president, I can't remember the name of his, I think it starts something like with an M or something like that, who had a vice president, Teddy Roosevelt, that this guy was actually pro letting business do what they had been doing and kind of staying out and making pro-business legislation to help keep the monopolies and stuff like that. But Teddy Roosevelt ended up being anti. So, of course, the way that I think about this, if you actually really look at what actually happened, because, like Teddy Roosevelt was supposedly like the trust buster, right? And trusts are basically just corporations, they're companies. And so the way the actual story goes with like the Standard Oil owned by the Rockefellers is that when that was finally so-called broken up by the government, Rockefeller still owned majority stakes in every one of those little corporations that was broken up into. And then those companies went on to make billions and billions and billions of dollars, essentially, and still exist today in many cases. And so, therefore, the Rockefeller family actually majorly benefited from that. It was able to have a competition that increased incentive in the market to buy the products for the use of consumption by the masses, because the products were cheaper, because you had so-called these competing companies that were not really actually competing, because the majority of stock were still owned by the Rockefellers and his filth. So, and then on top of that, the Rockefellers, or at least, what was the first Rockefeller? What was his name? Shoot, why can't I remember his first name? I suck at this particular thing. But anyway, he went into banking and financing business, and was one of the reasons of the 1907 panic. Well, he wasn't the cause of it per se, but what actually occurred was that he was competing with J.P. Morgan and Company in New York, and he had set up a bank trust. And J.P. Morgan just put out and saying that this bank trust, this up-and-coming bank trust, was insolvent and sucked. And so people started pulling money out of that bank and then started pulling money out of all sorts of banks. And then so there was a panic. And then the result was that J.P. Morgan bailed out the other banks, right? He came to the savior, and then because of that, they're like, well, JP Morgan shouldn't have to bail us out again, so now we need to be able to create the Federal Reserve so that the government can bail out, because we don't want to have to owe money to JP Morgan, because we don't want to owe any favors to that guy, right? Well, ideally, yeah, right? No. I mean, that's the way that they might tell the story, but that's not the actual reality of what occurs. Because what actually occurs is that the government actually pays these people anyway. They just pay them with money that they don't have, because they just print it up and type it into their bank accounts. So, yeah, there's certainly that. Anyway, let's continue on.
To ban these extremist groups, not realizing they're handing over the power of a massive multinational corporation to delete people from public life. Many businesses in New York don't even accept cash anymore. It's a growing trend. It's very frustrating to many people because not everyone has a credit or debit card. But this will be a serious problem. If people can't have a credit card, you are forcing them in some jurisdictions to either leave or go without. Another story that I want to make sure is highlighted as we talk about escalation is an anarchist group that flooded the offices of a lawyer in Portland. They put a hose through his mailbox and damaged all of the property, causing thousands of...
Alright, so as I do remember saying this earlier, yes, this was the particular portion here that Tim Pool suddenly brings into here to say that an anarchist group does this. Now, again, I can't say whether or not this is an anarchist group or not. Certainly not the kind of ilk that I would like to put myself in, because this is... Now, on the other hand, if this is just a politician, I actually don't care. I mean, if this was just like a normal, non-politician, non-governmental person, I would care. I would have an issue with this, but I don't really have that much of an issue with people destroying property of politicians, because they have no problems with destroying our property and taking our property, so why should I give a shit about their property? That's just the way I have to say about that.
dollars in damage. Now the lawyer says he feels like he's not a victim. The reason these anarchists did this was to terrorize anyone who, quote, collaborated with ICE. The reason I highlight this story is because we can see how things are starting to escalate. Mark Pitkovich of the Anti-Defamation League tweeted, "Anarchists violenced against a law office in Portland, Oregon. They claimed their goal was to cause maximum economic damage, to intimidate individuals and businesses from having any relationship with government agency ICE." But what was the response? Violence. For sure this is vandalism, but violence is a big stretch. Pitkovich says, "Damaging property is a violent act. Ask any manager of a Planned Parenthood clinic that has suffered an arson attempt, or any religious leader of a mosque, synagogue, or church that has experienced arson."
Yes, I would technically agree with this. Now, I mean, this is saying it's a law office. I mean, that's a little bit kind of a more deeper thing. I mean, lawyers, they technically work for the state, even if they're private, because the whole point is actually knowing the law. They're more or less politicians who defend and use the law to their ability. I think they're filth. So I just wanted to leave it at that. I think that they're just terrible people, to be honest. I mean, and most people actually think that they are terrible people, lawyers. I would say that most people think that. I don't really know that for sure. I'm not speaking for most people, but I tend to see that, unless, of course, you're talking about, like, an uncle that's a lawyer or something like that. Of course, he's the one good lawyer, right? Or your dad's a lawyer, he's the one good lawyer, right? Or maybe you have a friend that's a lawyer, he's the only good lawyer. But all the others suck, right? Well, I tend to believe that all lawyers are bad, because they actually use the law to their benefit, for their profit. And so I think that's a horrible thing to do that, because, I mean, I don't have an issue with if you were, like, in a particular society like of mine, where you don't have law enforcement per se, under my particular beliefs, where you have a different form of justice that doesn't use violence unless it's absolutely necessary, and that would be generally in the case of self-defense. So, but other than that, having people who know what the rules are and making money off of that, like knowing the rules to give people advice and stuff like that, I have no problem with. And I suppose using those people to represent people who are judges or arbiters or whoever decided to be the judge or arbiter or whoever's going to settle a civil issue, or if you want to call it a criminal issue in the case of like a violence on property or against someone, then yeah, in that kind of case, I still count it as a civil case. I mean, we'll go with the Brehon Irish law kind of on this, where with the Brehon laws, if you actually look up the Brehon laws for the old Irish type of society, those laws were all civil laws. There were no criminal laws. People were not prosecuted criminally. They were prosecuted civilly. And so what that means is that basically that they kind of use, if you're more familiar with Amish type of way of doing things, where if you didn't do the justice to pay the the reparations, so to speak, or the what's the kind of legal word to use for the paying back for whatever kind of issues that you caused with other people to have victims or whatnot, restitution, yeah, that's what it's called. That if you didn't actually pay what the judges, which were called the Brehons, so this was actually a society based on judges and arbiters, the judges and arbiters, they actually made the rules, right? And people are complaining today in this society that judges are making rules, like the Supreme Court are making the rules. Like, for instance, there is no actual words in the Constitution that really say that you have a right to an abortion. You have a right for the government to pay for that abortion too. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution about that, and the Supreme Court is just making up their own rules for that. There's nothing in the Constitution about that. I mean, of course, they usually say about the right to privacy. Well, you know what? Fuck that. If they're going to be about the right to privacy, then don't tell me what kind of fucking drugs I want to put in my body. Don't tell me what kind of alcohol I want to put in my body. Fuck you on your right to privacy. You don't give a shit about the right to privacy. You're just using that to hide behind that because that's the only thing that you might have actually had an argument for. But you don't really actually have an argument when it comes to everything else, because you take away the fucking privacy, especially with the medical stuff. Because, I mean, let's say you want to have a procedure that somebody knows how to do, but it's not legal to do it in this country, but it's legal to do it in a different place, like China or Russia or Europe or something like that, or Canada or whatever, Mexico. That can't be done because the government arbitrarily decides that you can't do it. And of course, if you decide that you want to get it done, then the government has a right to be able to go ahead and investigate your doctor and your medical records to see if it was actually done. Fuck privacy. They don't give a shit about it. So I don't care if you go ahead and say, well, abortion is about the privacy and decisions between the doctor and the female. That's just fucking bullshit. Because they don't care about it with everything else. Everything else, they have an actual right to see what's going on, so that just in case there's something that's criminal going on, like giving drugs that shouldn't be given, or doing procedures that shouldn't be given, or something that to that effect, the privacy is fucked on that. So in this particular one case of abortions, they don't give a fuck about privacy. Well, they still have it on record, and they still find out if let's say for instance that an illegal abortion occurs, because you actually not only have to have a certified abortionist, you have to follow other procedures too. So if those procedures aren't followed, the government's going to come in and find out what kind of records or other kind of bullshit to find out about what happened with you. And then they're going to come and question you and ask you questions. So fuck the privacy. They don't give a shit about that. And that's all I have to say about that.
You can't commit violence against inanimate objects. And Pitkovich tries to no avail to explain, yes, you can. Just the other day, we saw this story from Fox News. that the FBI is probing an Antifa plot to buy guns from the cartel in Mexico and stage an armed rebellion at the border. And today, a communist group ambushed police, killing 15. I highlight these other stories to show you the dramatic escalation we're seeing across the board. Attacking financial institutions is just one step to shut people out from the conversation. They will ban you from social media, but they will also take away your money. They want you to be scared. They want you to fall in line.
Oh yeah, by the way, since I was actually talking about the judges there, I forgot to actually say that what the whole reason of that, what I was actually really saying is that it was actually a thing in the old Irish society, is that the judges were the ones who essentially made the rules, but they didn't really actually change the rules most of the time. They really actually wrote rules from like the very beginning and then didn't really write any more rules for the most part. They really just kind of like just made decisions based on those rules that had already been set from maybe, they're saying even like maybe 10,000 years. I don't really know exactly, but maybe even 5,000 years. No one's really entirely sure how long the Brehon Society really has lasted, because they didn't really actually start keeping records until much later. So we're talking more about maybe closer to 1,000 for the actual records, but we don't really actually know for sure how long it lasted before then, because there's not really a whole lot of records, like I said. So, I mean, I would be kind of more for that kind of system if you're going to say, like, have a government, because that government existed only to really protect the judges and pay the judges, compensate the judges for their time and effort. And so, yeah, there was technically like kings and stuff like that, but generally those kings were actually voted kings. They were voted for by the populace, and they existed to protect the judges and compensate them. They didn't really have any other power outside of that, so they didn't have any power to make laws or write laws or anything like that. So that would be a closer to a government type of system that I would be for. I don't want a government, but it would be certainly closer to a type of system that I would be for. And, you know, since this kind of system actually existed peacefully for a long time, and actually ended up being that they weren't able to actually assimilate into the British/UK culture, that they actually ended up having to separate and create their own Ireland. So it's like you got Northern Ireland, and then you got Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and Ireland is their own country, which is part of the EU now, though. So they've really gone away from their actual old traditions for some reason, largely because some of the British culture did kind of get forced upon them, like for instance the actual criminal laws, and started putting prisons and having standing armies and stuff like that, which really kind of has, I mean, okay, if you look at their current society, I mean, they're doing pretty well. The actual Ireland, not the Northern Ireland, the real Ireland, they're actually doing pretty well right now. But they were actually kind of screwed over, if one remembers, the potato famine. That largely actually had to do with like British crap and stuff like that. So, but and that was actually having to do with, like, you know, the actual, I think the whole island of Ireland that included what's today is Northern Ireland. But the real Irish are no longer really the real Irish anymore, because they don't hold their traditions of civility like they used to. Anyway, I just wanted to say that and make that point, that while people are in this particular American society are complaining that judges are making the laws and rules, well, there was a society that actually did do that.
And stop speaking up. They can't argue against your ideas, so they'll seek to get you banned. They'll seek to take away your source of income. They will seek to remove your ability to even transact with other people. If that doesn't work, they will destroy the building you work in, and then the most extreme, they'll plot an armed rebellion, or they'll ambush police officers and kill them. This escalation is serious, and we have to make sure we don't allow companies to be subject.
Okay, so this is quite a subjective feeling or opinion or belief. I mean, it may appear like this is happening, but it's happening at such a small scale, it's not likely to really actually be that much of an issue. Plus, there's not anything that can really be done about it. Most of the laws technically protect, right? Hold on, excuse me 1 second. But yeah, most of the laws, like the Constitution, protects these anarchist, so-called anarchist groups, the right to form militias and bear arms. So that's actually part of American rights. And so for you to say that, well, this is bad and it shouldn't be happening, well, maybe it shouldn't be happening. I'm not saying that it can't happen. And I'm not saying, I mean, I am saying that, yeah, it shouldn't be happening, but I am not saying that in the sense of like, that it's not allowed to happen. I'm saying that in the sense that it shouldn't be happening because this has been created by the very thing that Tim Pool is arguing for, a system of quasi-free market, which essentially has the government come in and regulate. And this is actually very interesting because Tim Pool will argue for privileges in his mixed economy, where, for instance, regulations only apply to people who have a larger scale. So, therefore, for instance, Tim Pool just recently argued about the fact that, and this was in his video about his so-called friend smearing him, right? And like using the publicly recorded Discord server that he used to have. And so he was basically saying, he was explaining away in his video, but Tim Pool was explaining in his video that he had essentially started creating a censorship program on his Discord. And then he argued and said, well, it was fine for me to have the censorship for two reasons, because he was saying it was causing a disruption to the actual conversations, and because he had a smaller scale platform for it. So this was his argument to say, well, it's okay for him to censor, and that he said he wasn't censoring on political beliefs, but I don't know. I mean, I can't necessarily verify that for sure because I was just now hearing about it. But anyway, the point is that I'm noticing here that Tim Pool is actually for regulation for the big businesses to benefit himself, while it's okay for him to go ahead and do the very same things that he doesn't want these businesses to do. I actually find that very interesting, that he argues for the actual privileges of doing or not doing certain things based on the scale, and so that if the scale is small enough, it's fine. Like, for instance, he is kind of okay with the argument for the gay bakery type of deal, where, well, because it's a small scale and you can go to other bakeries, that, okay, you can argue that that's okay. Of course, he'll go ahead and argue and say, and this is where it might get kind of dicey for me to say this, he's going to say the kind of Elizabeth Warren, Obama type of deal where, well, we paid for the education for your employees. We paid for the utilities for you to operate there. We paid for the roads for you to operate there. You don't really actually own the business. Technically you do, but you don't really actually own the business because we paid for all of those things, so you can't deny anybody that you want to deny. That's basically what his view is on that. Is that basically the Naziist kind of view, the fascist kind of view, where essentially everything is socialized, and that the businesses that exist in the market relied on the socialized things to be able to exist. This is a fascist view. I mean, so, and I actually wrote a comment about this, but if you were to take out the actual business portion here, and say this for the aspect of like, let's say, like a relationship, right? That you're not allowed to discriminate in relationships, let's say. Now, I mean, technically, legally, you can, but let's just use this for an example, because this is how I kind of stated the comment. And actually, this is not really my real statement. I just applied it to Tim Pool. And so, but anyway, the statement would go as such is that, okay, so you can't deny sex to me, or you can't deny a date to me, because I paid for your education. I paid for your ability to go on the road or the sidewalk. I paid for your ability to have a fiat currency. I paid for all of that stuff, and so you can't deny me if I want to. If I want to stick my dick in your stick or your holes, you can't deny that, because you're discriminating against me, and I paid for you. I paid for your subsidized food that you eat, unless of course you eat organic, but it's still subsidized. I paid for your defense. So, yeah. How about that? Since I paid for all that stuff, how about I stick my dick in you, huh? Would that be okay? Would you be okay with that? And if you said no, I'd be like, no, you're not allowed to say no, bitch. I'm still going to stick my dick in you. You can't say no. I mean, this is literally, because this is the Stefan Molyneux argument, is that technically, like, it's kind of like the rapist argument, is that in the sense of like because the government is taking your property, right? And they're basically raping you of property. So like in the sense of like in a rape, they do stuff to you without your permission. And so like with the taking your money, they do that to you without your permission. Yeah, you could say, well, but you get stuff back for it. So, you benefit from it. Well, but does that mean that I agree to that money being taken? Excuse me. So, maybe I didn't explain the Stefan Molyneux version very well, but the point here is that, well, you can't deny people if you're gonna have that kind of view, right? You can't deny people on anything. That no discrimination would be allowed. You would have to. Everybody would allowed to be a rapist. Everybody would allowed to be able to do whatever they wanted to somebody. You say like, well, I paid for all that shit for you, so you don't get to have that house. You have to let me in your house, or if you don't let me in your house, I'll have to get the government to make you let me in your house and use your stuff, because in order for you to use that stuff, you have to be on the road that I pay for. You have to use the electricity that I pay for my utility, with the utilities and your water, and then all the education that went into making that stuff that you have in your house, and yada yada yada. So if you're gonna go down that road, that's a fucking slippery slope here, man. Well, you're going down that road, you're basically saying that everything is available for me that is yours, or that you claim is yours. And I don't want that. I'm not actually saying I want this stuff. I don't want to stick my dick in you. I'm actually really just using that as an example here. It's an extreme example, but I'm using this as an example here because this is an ideology that is illogical in your reasoning, because of the fact that if you were to use this reasoning for anything else, because it's a slippery slope, then that means that you can't deny anybody anything. That you have zero privacy. You have nothing that you can deny anybody, because everything that you have because of everybody else. That's basically what you're saying, is that because in a business, you might say, well, that business actually owns everything within that business except for the things that are provided by, like, through the utilities and the labor of the. But everything else that you get from it, the profits that you earn, that's technically yours. So that's your property. So basically what you're saying is that you're saying is that even though that this stuff is their property, they don't actually have a right to do what they want with that property. That's basically what you're saying. That they don't have a right to do that. And so, because that property, it doesn't matter if it's a business or not. A business is really just in the essence of this market here that we're talking about. A business is really just an entity that is given legitimacy by the government. A business doesn't even need to be a business. If I was to sell you a mix of music or something like that, and I did it like as a one-time thing, or I only do it to with my friends or something like that. Is that really a business? Or I mean, if I'm not really having a business, it's a trade, but is it really a business? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's whatever can be defined as that, but in this case of you saying that there's this a bakery or a place of business that has a physical location, that you call it a business just because it's not a home or an individual. What's the difference? What is really the difference? This is why you can't really say, well, because of the socialized systems that provided for you to be able to have this business, you have to provide your services and your property. Well, then I say, since you are paid for by me, you have to do whatever the fuck I say. That's what you're saying. I don't want to do that. But if you're gonna have that kind of mentality, that's what the fuck I'm gonna do. And this kind of pisses me off a little bit. This is what frustrates me. And so I want to call it this hypocrisy, because this is absolutely bullshit. Because all you're doing is just subjectively calling this property not really property owned by this place. And so how do you call like somebody who has a home the place that does a business out of their home? Are you saying, well, this is their home, but they're letting people into their home to do business, or maybe they're I don't know, selling stuff outside of their home so nobody really comes to their business, or their home. But if they did business out of their home, is that a business? I mean, how do you constitute what a business is? I mean, how do you define what a business is? Just because people are trading stuff? Well, that happens all the fucking time. It happens without a license or whatnot. It happens all the time, and it doesn't have to be things of like actual monetary value. Right now, I'm actually making something, and if other people watch it, that's a trade, because they see it, I give it to them. That's a trade. It's not a monetary trade necessarily. Maybe they'll give me something for it. I don't know. I would gladly accept it for sure, and I'd gladly be appreciative of it. Just like people who give you stuff. That is a business transaction. And so what do you really call that? I mean, a customer is a business person, because what they're actually wanting is and this is the Stefan Molyneux version, which it might not even be his thing, but he says it a lot, where he says that, you have $1, I have a pencil, you're more willing to part with that $1 so you could have that pencil, and I'm more willing to part with my pencil to have that $1. So both of us are business people. We're both business people because we're trading something. We're trading things of value, right? So I mean, why does the person who has a physical non-monetary item, why are they a business, but the person who has the money, like that's trading the money for the pencil or whatever, why are they not a business? What's the difference between them and the person who has the pencil? Why is the person who has the pencil the one that's the business, but the person who has the $1 not somebody who has the business? They're both technically consumers because they're consuming stuff. You're consuming the $1 that is given to you in exchange for the pencil. I mean, this is just idiocy for you to really just compare to say that a business or somebody doing a business transaction is not something that people do on a daily basis without actually a monetary exchange. It doesn't have to be a monetary exchange. It just be something of value, and it can be done like just by saying a greeting. That's a business transaction. I mean, if somebody is not worth giving a greeting to, you don't greet them, and so you're not exchanging anything. Might not be of monetary value, but it's a trade. It's an exchange. So I mean, the only way that I see this is what you're saying is that a business is really just something that a government legitimizes. So therefore, that a free market could never exist anyway, because the only way that there can be business transactions is if you have a government. I mean, that's basically what you're saying here. It's just that the only way that you can actually do legitimate businesses is if you have a government. Yeah, of course, in this particular society, for sure, currently right now. But what if you were to take away the government and everything becomes legitimate? Then it's all business, right? And so you got to think about it in a scale like this, because again, people exchange things on different aspects and do it without the government. Just like this particular thing right here. if you ever see this and you like this, or maybe you don't like it because I'm criticizing you, I don't know. Maybe you find some value from it because what I say might make sense to you. Maybe it won't. It's not really up to me whether you find it valuable or not. Excuse me. It's not up to me whether anybody finds this valuable or not. But I certainly would like to have people, see value in it and take it and then maybe exchange something of value too. It doesn't even have to be money. I'm fine with exchanging ideas. I'm fine with exchanging whatever because this is how we operate as humans together in society. And this is already a 2.5 hour thing for a 12-minute video. So let's go ahead and continue on because I think I've had my say with that particular thing.
To moral policing by fringe activist groups that don't really know what they're talking about or do and are lying and cheating to try and win in the culture war. People in this country have a right to express themselves freely. Yes, companies have a social responsibility, but who will be the arbiter of what is moral and just? This is why we have the government we have. Activists that can't get the government to change these rules target corporations.
Yeah, like I said, I've kind of already explained this. This is not why we have the government we have. Of course, this is the reason. This is in spite of the government that we have things like this, because we have a government. They did nothing. They're not doing anything. They actually caused it in the first place. I don't think you can deny this. That there's many aspects to this. That there's at play with the government. Maybe they didn't specifically plan this to happen, but they certainly played a part to it, played a role into allowing this to happen and causing this to happen because it's part of our society. So therefore, they are at fault for it. They're responsible for it. It wouldn't have ideally happened. Most likely, it wouldn't have happened in an actual non-governmental way. I mean, I don't really know what the actual solutions are to everything for everybody. I don't claim to know all the solutions, but I can tell you that the government solutions are actually causing the problems. The government doesn't, even though it kind of operates as a business as everything does, it operates on a different plane than what other businesses do. It operates on the plane of immorality because it first has to take our property from us through force in order to be able to do what it does. And it already operates on an immoral plane. There's nothing in the laws that are about justice or morality. They're about control of people. I mean, yeah, it's wrong to murder people, but the government murders people too. I mean, they'll murder the person who murdered somebody. Is that really moral? I think I know what Tim Pool feels on this, but it's okay for the government to murder. It's okay for the government to steal. It's okay for the government to destroy people's property. It's okay for the government to pollute. It's okay for the government to bomb people. It's okay for the government to start fires. It's okay for the government to do drugs. It's okay for the government to do whatever the fuck they want, but not us. It's not about morality. It's about control. That's what government is. It's about control. I mean, you could say, well, the government is of the people, for the people, by the people. You could say whatever the fuck you want. Doesn't actually make it so. I mean, this is just basics here. I mean, this is the words are really just words, and they're meaningless without actual real meaning behind them. That besides the fact, like I think I've already said, and maybe I said it in my original take that I screwed up, that the Constitution was created under a time where not even a majority of people could consent. So a majority of people who were property owners could consent. A majority of people who had guns could consent. Guns to provide enforcement, to provide for a fighting force against the British. Well, at least prior to the Constitution, anyway. I mean, because there were kind of a constitutional type deal for the Continental Congress prior to becoming the Congress. I kind of like the Continental Congress as a that kind of sounds better than just saying the Congress. I don't know. Maybe just say I have a bias against Congress. I am kind of or at least I was a constitutionalist, a very strong constitutionalist. I mean, something that my dad pointed out to me before I even realized it. And I am very much fond of the founding fathers, even though I pretty much hate their guts. At the same time, I'm very fond of that particular era. I kind of believed it was something that it wasn't really. I believed it was something other than that, and something greater. But I don't really think it was as good as it's made out to be. Because, of course, the victors write the history, and the victors write the history in a favorable position to themselves, of course. And so it sounds good, but of course, when you actually look at it logically, it sounds pretty bad too. I mean, basically, you've got the British committing genocide on the people who want to consent to no longer being a part of whatever the British are, right? And then you have the revolutionists who more or less were willing to be violent before the British were, sort of. I mean, technically, with the fact that you collect taxes, you have to be violent. So, I mean, it kind of was already violence upon them, but I don't know, at the same time, the violence in leading to actual war. And it's actually very funny how some people argue and say, like, well, it was moral for the American Revolution to occur, but it wasn't moral for the Southern Revolution to occur because, well, they were protecting slavery. Well, I'll have you know that the North was protecting slavery too at the time of the so-called Civil War. And Lincoln was very careful about protecting slavery too, even in the fact of maybe even having an amendment that kind of passed somewhat that would actually protect slavery specifically. Of course, people will argue, well, it didn't really matter anyway. Yeah, it didn't matter anyway. But the point is that it was symbolic, saying that, well, Lincoln was willing to actually protect the institution of slavery for the result of keeping the Union. And that was the actual rationale of what it was, and nothing that occurred during that war was actually moral. I mean, there was a mass genocide because of that, and there was not only during that, Lincoln murdered a lot of natives as well, called for the murder of a lot of natives as well, and he actually kind of did a little bit of a line about it. I think he murdered something like, well, he was going to murder like 300 of them because of reasons, and then because of foreign political issues, because even at that time murdering the innocents of like 300 natives was actually kind of wrong, even in the eyes of the rest of the world at that particular time. Lincoln brought it down to, instead of the 300, he brought it down to 50. So really going to be like 300. I don't remember the exact number, but it was something ridiculous, like 300 or something like that. But still, at the same point, bringing it down to that 50 was still the largest mass execution in a kind of like a criminal so-called aspect, a military criminal trial type of deal, where there were technically trials for these natives who were not actually actually agree to the American rules, by the way, had to be tried by the Americans regardless, and got executed as well for it. But again, still the biggest mass execution, at least for the going through the criminal justice system. And this was okayed by Lincoln. He took away because originally, like I said, there were like 300 or something like that, and he took away most of those. But still, 50 is a fucking lot. And there were set to be like 300 of them under his administration, and he was going to do it. But there was kind of like some political backlash because of that. And so Lincoln himself was not the good man that people put him out to be. There's a whole lot of fucking shit that was horrible. That was very horrible that what he did. And, just excused it because of war. It's not excusable. War is created by governments. War cannot succeed without government. It can succeed without stealing people's wealth. You need to steal people's wealth and property to be able to sustain a war. And you can't do that without extreme violence on innocents. And then you're also causing violence on people who didn't ask for violence, who are just defending themselves. Now, I'm not a pro-Southerner in the aspect of that. I agreed with the Southerners. I'm a pro-Southerner in the aspect of that. I'm pro in the ability to be able to choose what kind of society you want to make. And that was basically what it was. Yeah, sure, it was wrong that they wanted slavery, but so did the Union at the damn time of the Civil War. I mean, they profited from slavery. I mean, the banks profited from slavery. Everybody profited from slavery. It wasn't just some fucking Southern shit. And this is fucking bullshit that people keep going on about how it was just a fucking Southern thing. Yeah, it was a Southern thing, but it wasn't just a fucking Southern thing. Everybody profited from it. God damn. Get your fucking shit straight. I mean, this is actually something that they kind of teach in school, but at the same time, they also go ahead and say, well, it's still the fault of the South because they're the one who owns the slaves. But, see, the reality is that they were given incentives by the North because the North would provide the plantation owners with cheap loans and stuff like that, so that they could get more slaves and, increase their plantation sizes and stuff like that. There were no banks in the South. I mean, at least not prior to the Civil War. Most of the banks in the industry were in the North, and the North pretty much kept the South from having any industry, including rail. And most of that was actually subsidized by taxes, which were paid through tariffs at that particular time because there was no income tax. And so who paid the tariffs was generally the people in the South, because the South wanted to pay for the only people who had the necessity for any manufactured goods for the most part were the people in the South, not the people in the North. I mean, yeah, certainly some things, but most of that stuff they could get, relatively easily in the North for cheaper than getting the imports. But again, like I said, most of the actual things that were actually needed that you could get from like the British and other places, that went to the South, and so the tariffs were paid for largely by the South. And so this is basically kind of like in a kind of situation today where like the working class pays for the welfare of the banks and the corporations. They're the biggest welfare receivers. It's not actually the blacks or the minorities or whatnot. The biggest welfare receivers are the banks and the corporations, as they did during and prior to the Civil War and even after. I mean, the railroads. I mean, they got railroad subsidies, and they got railroad loans from the government, specific loans for people. And some of these loans turned out to be absolutely bullshit. That they just took the money and ran, more or less. And I mean, yeah, you could say that a lot of these loans did actually end up getting paid off with some interest paid back to. But see, the thing is that then it also created monopolies and stuff like that. So it really actually screwed things up, because you had a government that was able to take a larger amount of wealth from a greater amount of people than the actual private banks could, so that the government was able to provide the loans and incentivize growth, and then there ended up being panics and depressions and stuff like that, and so this was the fault of the government. Yeah, okay, maybe the businesses were lobbying the government to do this for them, but that's not really the point. The point is that the government actually exists to protect the wealthy. The government doesn't exist to protect the poor. This has always been a fact of every single government, including this one. It exists to protect the wealthy. It existed to protect the wealthy from the beginning, and it exists to protect the wealthy now. It doesn't give a shit about people who can't pay taxes, and even if they can pay taxes, they treat them like shit. They don't give them the services that they need. They keep them poor because they don't want them to be richer, because they want to. That's one of the ways of protecting the wealthy, is to keep the poor poor. Because if the poor stay poor, then the wealthy don't have competition and they can continue to gain wealth. And then people go ahead and say that, well, this is, governments are made by the people for the people. No, the fuck they're not. Never. You can put that on paper, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So what we consented to, what we supposedly consented to back in 1787 to the Constitution, is not something that we consented to as the common person did consent to. They were not allowed to consent to it. Again, not more than maybe a quarter of the population that existed at the time was allowed to actually vote. That's not even a majority. But even with that, only a majority of those people could actually count to say, well, this is what it's going to be because a majority of us say so. But it wasn't a majority of the majority. It was just a majority of the minority. And that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it always will be if you get fucking government. It is to protect the wealth of the minorities. And the minority is being the wealthy. Not the minority as being the minorities in racial and social aspects. The minorities in wealth aspects. And that is what it is. And if you can't fucking see this, Temple, or anybody else, my God, I don't know what to say.
And as more of our speech takes place on private platforms, and even financial transactions take place on private platforms, we're becoming extremely vulnerable. A long time ago, you had the right to speak openly and freely in public discourse. But because public discourse is taking place on...
Okay, I'm going to have to stop here with that because that's bullshit. That's bullshit. You didn't have the right to speak freely in public discourse a long time ago. It depends upon what we're talking about as a long time ago as well. I mean, are you not forgetting the struggles of the civil rights movement? That there are many people who were arrested because they were peacefully protesting and peacefully wanting their right to free speech and gather and stuff like that. So which a long time ago are we talking about? Are we talking about 10 years ago, a long time ago? No, still didn't have it then. Okay, some people had it, but some people didn't. What about, what long time ago are we talking about here? Never really has the full population really had what you're talking about. It's been put into your mind that it exists, but it doesn't exist. You're living in a fantasy world. You've never had free speech. You've only had free speech to the extent that they let you be able to do it. Maybe. I mean, what about fucking Martin Luther King arrested for just being able to speak and peacefully protest? What about so many people, even in the 90s, the 2000s, and whenever? I mean, look at Julian Assange. What about his right? He's not even an American citizen, but yet he's going to be tried as an American citizen, essentially, under American citizen rules because he is a criminal for, putting up the atrocities of the government. And they're not even going to charge him for that. They're actually charging him for just colluding with, what's his or her face's name? God, that transgender spy. We'll just say that. And I don't really have a problem against transgenders per se. I mean, if you want to do that, that's your thing. I'd prefer that you keep it away from me as much as possible. But I don't think you're less human because of it. I just, I don't. I'm not interested in it. I mean, as long as you don't, try to flaunt it in front of me, and that you don't make it some sort of virtuous thing or whatever. I mean, you can be your all transgender self in front of me as long as you try to make yourself be as human as possible. If you try to make yourself like you're more than human, better than human, have better privileges than me, or that I should treat you differently because you're a transgender, no, fuck that. I'm going to treat you the way that you deserve to be treated, just as I would with anybody else. Now, at the same point, I'm kind of a little bit of a shy person, and so when I'm not really sure how to talk to somebody new, it's not out of disrespect per se. I mean, because I have this issue with all kind of new people that I don't know. If I don't know how to talk to you, I'm a little awkward with that. But once I get settled in, I'm okay with it. So, but again, as long as you don't expect me to treat you differently, I'm fine. I don't give a shit about that. Just keep that shit away. I mean, put on your wig and your dress, or if you're a male, if you're a female transitioning or transitioned into a male, that's fine. Actually, I'll tell you what. I mean, I'm gonna be a little bit biased here, but I prefer the transition of a female to male. I have seen both. I mean, it's just so weird to see a male be a female. It's not as weird for me to see a female be a male, because there's a lot of females who have already kind of made themselves look like males, and it's just try to act like males too, and it's not really as awkward. It's not that I dislike it, I'm just not used to it. It's not a thing I'm saying I don't like it. It's just I don't know how to respond to it. I mean, because I have to say that I just haven't really actually talked to a whole lot of transgender males. I've talked to some transgender females, and I don't really care if where the hell you take your piss or your shit. I don't. I mean, just be safe, be cautious. I'm concerned about some of the health of these people when they go into restrooms, and I'm not actually so much concerned about them going into male restrooms as much. I'm actually more concerned about possible female violence on male transgenders, because from what I've seen in my experience, the actual people who get aggressive about males who are peeing or pooping in female restrooms is that the females are the ones getting aggressive and butthurt about it. I have no problem if the male transgender wants to come and do it in the male restroom, or if a female transgender wants to come, or even just a female who's not a transgender. I don't give a shit. Well, I might give a shit while I'm in the bathroom, not to the person who's in there. I'd rather actually do it all in peace, but when it's in the public, you kind of got to deal with it no matter what. I mean, that's my real actual position is that everybody get the fuck out. It's my bathroom when I'm in there. Get the fuck out. Yeah, I'm kind of a little stupid about that, but I don't discriminate in that manner. I honestly do think that all bathrooms should be available to anybody. There shouldn't be some sort of specific one for people. Just be safe, because in either restroom you're gonna possibly have some violent people. So just be on the lookout. Be cautious. Maybe take some weapons. I don't know. Be careful. You always need to be careful in places like that, because they are vulnerable places, since people are not really concerned about violence. But the nice thing about bathrooms is that they do have lots of hard surfaces. So in the event that you did not bring a weapon, you can actually use those hard surfaces as a weapon if you need to protect yourself. So just a heads up for those who are interested in self-defense, I would start trying to learn to go ahead and use hard surfaces in your environment to go ahead and protect yourself. I mean, I have to say that I'm kind of taking that from Burn Notice, but at the same time, it's pretty damn true. There's a whole lot of hard surfaces in a restroom, and there's a whole lot of opportunities for you to protect yourself. So even though it's a very vulnerable place, you can turn it into a not so vulnerable place and take away that stigma, both male and female. Because despite the fact that people think that women are not strong enough to handle men, yes, technically, but if you flail around enough and are able to use some leverage and whatnot, you could use, especially a place like a bathroom, to your advantage when you don't actually have the actual physical strength to really overpower a man. I mean, I know police officers who have actually told me that 100-pound women need multiple police officers to help restrain, because kicking and flailing around and whatnot, it can cause damage, even for big ass police officers. So I mean, I've been told of that. So it is very possible for a small person, if they do the right things, to be able to use their environment to their advantage. Just saying. But with that being said, oh god, why was I even talking about the transgenders? Probably about like inclusivity shit and stuff like that. Oh yeah, whatever.
Privately owned platforms, we have lost that right. And the government can't really do anything about it. Perhaps they can if they pass a law, but for the time being, you have no right to be on these platforms. In fact, they argue forcing Twitter to keep up speech would force Twitter to be speaking. That effectively you're violating Twitter's right to speech itself by stopping them from censoring others. But now they're targeting these financial transaction companies. Because we used to trade money hand to hand, it was physical. But now it's digital, and a company handles that work, it's not governmental, and you have no right to a private platform. This may be one of the most dangerous escalations we have seen yet. But let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Minds at Timcast. Stay tuned.
Oh yeah, this is how I'm commenting here. Especially because I actually, when I've been trying to comment on Tim Pool's channels, he also has Timcast. This particular channel is Tim Pool, as you can see down there in the left-hand corner, as opposed to the Timcast channel. Plus, he has his like newsroom type of deal stuff. Yeah, so mainly I'm doing this because of the fact that I don't get the response I'd like when I'm trying to convince Tim Pool and any of his followers that this logic doesn't go to the path that needs to go to. I mean, at least just the way I see it, I just want to try to convince it of it, change minds. I don't want to do it by force. I want to do it by words as much as possible, as much as I can. So this is what I'm doing, and I'm making it a 3-hour thing. So we'll go ahead and call this an episode. If you like this episode, go ahead and hit that like button. If you didn't, go ahead and hit that like button anyway. No, I'm just kidding. You can hit dislike or leave comments down below. Let me know what you think, whether you liked it or not. I do have some socials, which I may be putting in the description. I will definitely be putting the link to Tim Pool's video in the description for sure, to give him some shout outs, because again, this is not to say that I dislike Tim Pool. This is just to call out my frustrations and criticisms about the logic of Tim Pool and many people. It's not really, I mean, Tim Pool's a big name, so yeah, here I'm gonna admit myself that I hope that by maybe reaching to Tim Pool or some of his audience that maybe I can convince more minds more easily. Maybe that's my purpose. That's how I believe I'd like to profit, is to change people's minds. I mean, I'm not going to currently really offer a Patreon, or any of that stuff. Maybe later, once I get a bigger audience, what I'd really actually like to do eventually with this channel is to go ahead and provide a channel to provide promotions for up and coming independent content creators. That's what I'd like this channel to be about, as well as being able to have my own independent content that I can share with audiences that are willing to partake of it. But I'm really wanting this channel to be, again, I'd like it to get big enough so that I can actually help other people. That's what I want this channel to be about. I want it to be about a channel that can be for the people, so to speak. I'm not. I probably might have to approve of certain content if people want to submit content to me to broadcast on my channel. I might have to approve of it, depending upon what it is and whatnot. If people are willing to go ahead and submit content to me, I might go ahead and publish it, no matter what. I don't know. I haven't really decided upon any real rules yet for that, but I would like to open this up as an opportunity at some point in the future. If people are willing to go ahead and publish content on my channel, providing that, I have a larger audience, or can get a larger audience, because right now I pretty much have a zero audience, which I'd like to change. Like I said, I really only operate kind of infrequently, so I want to try to do better about that. I just need to kind of get a better kind of schedule going on here. Mainly more of actually wanting to do this and being motivated to do this. It can be a big test, especially right now, where we're devoting 3 hours to just this. I'm going to probably have to go over a little bit of it just to see if it's something that I want. I said I'm not going to edit it, and I don't plan to really do much editing with it. But with that being said, I might actually still go ahead and just look it over and see how it appears to myself. And so it takes a while to do that, and that's just for this one video. And I'll probably have another video saying a lot of the same shit about Temple on the next video, because Temple is going to be my focus currently, because he's got me motivated, because I'm getting really frustrated about a lot of this shit he's putting up, and he's putting up this conspiracy stuff about the asteroid. Okay, yeah, maybe the asteroid will go ahead and hit. I don't know. I don't know really who to believe, because I don't have any experience in any of this. I don't have any technology to be able to view and calculate any of this, so I'm going to go with what the current data is, and if it does hit, there's not anything I can do about it. We might have been able to provide better solutions for it a long time ago if the government hadn't gotten involved with shit and stuff like that. Maybe the lasers that are maybe improved might be able to help with stuff, or maybe the government already has better things, they just aren't telling us, trying to scare us and stuff like that, or I don't know. But I think that with this constant stuff that Temple's putting out about these asteroids, I think it's kind of more of a fear-mongering type of deal, I think. And he's doing this fear-mongering too with potentially civil wars and this increased aggression and stuff like that. This is unnecessary, Tim. You're kind of, it seems like you're kind of turning into some tabloid here. Because it's fine for you to have your opinion on this, and I'm not going to discount your right to be able to have this opinion. But at the same time, I'm going to be critical of it and say, hey, man, look here. You've got no proof of many of these things that you keep saying. And, you're speculating, that's fine, especially with something of an asteroid. Maybe we can have something, a preparation for it. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we're just fucked, or maybe everything will be fine. We won't know till we know, or maybe we'll never know. You'll never get that opportunity. I don't know. It's not my real concern, because if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I mean, I would prefer it not to happen, but if it does happen, I can't do anything about it, can I? And that's just the way it is. But anyway, like I said, if you like this content, go ahead and let me know. If you don't like it, I don't care. I'm still going to provide this content. And shut the hell up, because this is fun to do this. I like doing this. And that's all I got to say. So thanks for watching.